And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield the balance of my time, but I want to enter one thing to the record, Mr. Chairman.
Can you do that after we just yield, then we'll enter it in the record after?
Sure.
Director Wray, did the FBI ask financial institutions to turn over their customers? Yield the time to me. Did the FBI ask financial institutions to turn over their customers' debit and credit card purchase history in the Washington, D.C. area for January 5th and 6th, 2021?
I don't know the answer to that as I sit here right now.
Well, we do, because Bank of America gave us this email from the FBI to Bank of America.
Well, I am aware that Bank of America provided information to the FBI, but what communications occurred between the FBI and Bank of America about it?
Let's read it. To recap our morning call, we are prepared to action the following threshold. Customers transacting debit card, credit card, Washington, D.C. purchases between 1/5/21, 1/6/21. That's scary enough. But then the next bullet point's even more scary. Any historical, capital letters, all capitals, any historical purchase of a firearm. You guys asked financial institutions, at least Bank of America, we think more. Did you guys ask him?
Again, I don't have the full sequence of the back and forth. You've got one, looks like you've got one email that I haven't seen before here. So I don't know that I have the full exchange that this
Well, does this email trouble you as much as it does members of the Judiciary Committee? That the FBI is asking for every single, I mean, we had members of Congress here that week, first time they're getting sworn in as a new member of Congress, their family in town, and you're sweeping, and they may happen to be a customer of Bank of America, and you're sweeping up every debit and credit card purchase of their family who were in town that week because their husband or their dad or their mom is getting sworn as a new member of Congress? And then you're also saying, overlaying that information with, did this person buy a firearm?
And the question is?
I'm just nervous about that. Are you nervous about that?
As I think I've testified before, my understanding is that our engagement with Bank of America was fully lawful, but that we recalled the leads that were cut to field
Well, if it's lawful, that was my next point. If it's lawful, why did you say we're not going to use these leads? That's what Mr. Jensen testified to when we deposed him, the director of the terrorism unit at the FBI. That's what he testified to. Why did you not use the leads if it was lawful to get the information?
Well, there are
Chairman, it's 1 minute and 18 seconds over time.
Sir, there are plenty of times where there are things that we lawfully can do, but that we decide is better that we not do. And I think that's what happened.
The idea that Mr. Massey said earlier, the idea that this is lawful, that you can ask this is scary. This is something else we're going to have to change. With that, I would yield to the gentlelady recognize the gentlelady from, well, we got a unanimous consent request from Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the Wall Street Journal article I'd like to enter into the record says Republicans eye sweet home for new FBI headquarters in Alabama.
All right, without objection, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady for Texas for 5 minutes, and then we'll take a break, Director.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Director Wray, for your presence here. Thank you to the men and women of the FBI in particular for the work that you've done on gun violence. And as well, the work that you've done in keeping Americans safe. Let me very quickly move on some issues that have been made a chief part of the work of our friends on the other side of the aisle. Republican members of this committee have spent much time of this Congress claiming that various aspects of the U.S. government have been weaponized against the American people. Director Wray, are you or your staff or auxiliaries weaponizing the FBI against the American people?
Absolutely not.
Thank you very much. Let me thank you as well for your civil rights work and emphasize that in addition, there have been representations that the FBI exaggerates domestic terrorism reports or data. Certainly, January 6th had its many different storytellers, but that was an act of domestic terrorism. I don't know how you could have exaggerated that as evidenced by the special congressional committee we had. But let's just think of domestic terrorism as it relates to the good men and women of our law enforcement. Take an example in February 2020 in Texas, where a white supremacist was engaged in conspiracy involving swatting, a harassment tactic, and all of the emergency services showed up over and over again. Does domestic terrorism impact negatively and dangerously on America's law enforcement and first responders?
Absolutely, and sometimes law enforcement are themselves the intended victims or targets of domestic violent extremism.
Though you have good, committed individuals, does the critique is legitimate? That's our job. was the constant condemnation impact on morale of FBI personnel or those trying to join the FBI?
Well, look, our people are human beings, and nobody likes to see the organization they've dedicated their careers, really their lives to, unfairly criticized. But I will tell you, as I said in my opening statement, that the good news is our people are also tough and resilient. Our attrition is in the low single digits and would be the envy of almost any employer, and our recruiting, unlike what's happening in law enforcement more generally, is actually up very significantly.
Thank you, and I look forward to it being diverse. Let me start with our whistleblower journey here. Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Serapin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name.
Yeah. The committee heard testimony that Mr. Serapin was suspended after he mishandled his service weapon and then said he wanted to use 2 female FBI executives as shooting targets. That was testimony of Jennifer Moore, HR under Human Resources under oath from the FBI. Mr. Serapin describes himself as a congressional whistleblower, but committee Republicans will not tell us whether he has been in contact with them. Are you familiar with former FBI agents Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen?
Again, I'm familiar with the names.
Thank you. O'Boyle was suspended for accessing information about an ongoing case and then leaking to the press, and Allen was suspended for interfering in the investigation of a January 6th suspect. Both Allen and O'Boyle testified before the Weaponization Committee in May. Were you aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
I think they are clearly there for all friends and family to see. I assume they wanted to be seen. Do you know who Kash Patel is, if you know?
Yes, I know who he is.
He's an aide to President Trump, isn't he? Or was an aide? Or is an aide to President Trump?
Well, he was an individual who served in a number of different roles, both up here on the Hill and in the executive branch.
Thank you. Here's another picture. It's the checks that Serapin sent to both O'Boyle and Allen. Each check was for $255,194. Let me say that again. These men were paid $255,194 after they testified as so-called whistleblowers. And it should be noted that it says here, as it says, for holding the line. Director, at the time that Serapin and Patel gave Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen these checks, do you happen to know if they were still employees of the FBI?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer.
If they were, 5 CFR 2635, and I'd appreciate if we could get an answer in writing after you go back, whether they were or not, prohibits FBI employees from accepting cash gifts, doesn't it?
Well, there are a whole number of rules that would apply to this. Again, I don't want to weigh in on a specific person.
But if they were, that rule applies about cash gifts.
I'm not aware of a situation in which they could appropriately accept cash gifts.
Just generally, if that applies to FBI agents about not taking cash gifts, is that correct?
There are definitely rules that apply to special agents accepting cash gifts.
Let me just finish this. Can you explain why an FBI agent should not receive cash? But let me move to one that I think is extremely important. Mr. Chairman, just a moment. And here is what I think is most interesting piece of this whole puzzle. O'Boyle and Allen are represented by an outfit called Empower Oversight. Empower Oversight is run by former Republican staffers. Do you know who else Empower Oversight might represent in any way?
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Let me just
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you so very much.
Respond.
Thank you. The so-called IRS whistleblower who Jim Jordan had relied upon. But does anyone need any further proof that these allegations are ginned up, corrupt political stunts advanced by those who don't want to see us follow the law? Finally, Mr. Chairman, here's another person who wants to join you on the 702, but the FBI has begun major reforms, and I think we should recognize that. You've been very kind. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. I would just point out, my guess is they got the money because they wanted the money because they had to they're trying to feed their family.
They actually haven't received the money. I have unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman, of a tweet Matthew Foldy put out here during this hearing. Right off the bat, Jerry Nadler lies about whistleblower getting $250,000. He says here, Marcus Allen has not received $250,000. He has not received or cashed the check that Kyle Seraphin posted online. Enter that in the record.
Into the record, the committee will take a 5-minute recess. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
All right, Steve, break it down for us, man. What did we just watch there?
Oh man, that was peak Christopher Wray doing his normal song and dance that he does every single time to every single question where he can't comment on an ongoing investigation or can't reveal sources and methods. Or now his new thing that he likes to do is when he's confronted with some sort of violation of law or policy, he just says the FBI doesn't do that. So the member will be asking him a question like, did you get did you guys censor free speech? Well, the FBI doesn't censor free speech. Well, the court found that you were censoring free speech. What's your response to that? Well, the FBI doesn't censor free speech. So I guess he just repeats like a robot that he is what he's supposed to in order to get out of jail. But he should be thrown into jail. And I think we need to do a deep dive into Sheila Jackson Lee, who's one of the most corrupt members of Congress, and apparently is illiterate, because on the bottom of the check that she had blown up like was a like it was a sweepstakes winning trophy, it says Kyle Seraphin, and on the top of the check it says Kyle Seraphin. Yet she thinks that Kyle Seraphin is Kash Patel.
So, and Kyle never cashed those checks, right? Like he couldn't send them out because of tax issues. So there was no money.
Yeah. So there's never been actually any money sent to those guys. It's still waiting. They're setting up a 501c4 so they can do it without the tax consequences, because they don't want to have to pay lawyers, and they don't want any of the donations to go to taxes or administrative costs. They want to just have the money to send directly to those guys, because that's why people contributed to the Give, Send, Go. So those checks have not been cashed. There's actually been no transaction, no money's changed hands at this point yet. And this is just a side note. Marcus Allen isn't an agent. Apparently nobody knows that, because everybody keeps saying Agent Marcus Allen. He's an SOS. He wasn't a special agent. And you think that these guys who obviously take their titles so seriously would actually do their due diligence to know what the person's job was before they were suspended.
And what is the difference between what is an SOS versus an actual official FBI agent?
It's an operational support capacity. It's a guy, his job is essentially to look through open source information and bring it back to aid in investigations. The premise of his actual suspension was they said that he was like this right-wing conspiracy theorist who was coming up with problems about January 6th. He was just going out and getting news articles and sending them back and saying, hey, for your situational awareness, this is being reported in the public. And the guys who got those news reports apparently didn't like that. He found sources that maybe didn't toe the party line, even though he was getting from all sources like it's his job. But because he sent them news information that said that January 6th might not be everything it was cracked up to be, might not be the insurrection that was going to overthrow the government, that made him a security risk, not able to hold a security clearance, even though he's a military veteran and had gotten the Employee of the Year award the year before.
Wow. What other parts of this have you heard so far that you would like to point out? What other lies? I mean, is there any truth that the Democrats are saying? Is everything that they're talking about just full of lies?
No, I mean, what they're trying to do, and so far the Republicans, good on them. They've kind of stayed away from Trump, and the Democrats are just going to scream Trump, 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 because that's a poll tested term that they can just argue and get people really angry on both sides about. The Republicans have kind of just actually gone into the actual meat of the whistleblower disclosures. They talked about the Bank of America stuff that George Hill brought forward, and then the FISA issues. And I mean, the only thing that I've seen that was really Trump sort of centered was the Crossfire Hurricane reference, and then that was a legitimate question, because it was obviously not a predicated investigation. I think that Christopher Wray thinks that he has a winner with his pushback on every time he's asked, like, hey, public trust in the FBI is at an all-time low in the history of the organization. And he just says, we have a record number of applicants for jobs, and we have a high retention rate. It's like, so dude, in the let's go branded economy with inflation out the wazoo, you're the highest paying law enforcement agency, and you have the government job security, unless you're a whistleblower, and you make 3x what the average American makes, and you think that means that the general population approves of the work that you're doing? No, the people that just want to get in on the grift, man, and everybody who's already in knows that they got a pretty good sweet deal, and they don't want to rock the boat.
100%. 100%. You guys are making, these FBI agents are all making over 3 figures, correct? Unless it's your first day.
After the 5 year, it's like mandatory promotions for the first 5 years. And once you have that, plus the law enforcement availability pay bump, you get a 25% pay bump on the what's actually listed as your pay. You're making, depends on where you are, between $120,000, $130,000.
And that's 40 hours, right?
Well, on paper, you're supposed to account for 50 hours, but nobody does 50. It's just because you have to be available for a call out, and there's no overtime. So like for me, I was called out in the middle of the night because I worked on an Indian reservation, but most people that work in a headquarters in a cubicle, like an accountant would or a lawyer would, no, they're just there at 8 and leave at 5, have an hour for lunch. Plus they also get an hour for working out, or mental wellness now. You can just do yoga or meditate, sit in a massage chair if you're in Los Angeles or Newark.
And that's on top of your lunch and everything?
Yes. They justify the fitness thing because there's a fitness requirement. You have to be able to pass an annual fitness test. So they basically say you get 3 hours per week that you can use. So combine it with your lunch, you get, and especially if you're in a headquarters city, there's a gym in the office, which you get for free. You don't have to pay a gym fee membership. So that's another benefit that's furnished to all FBI employees. But apparently, like, they can't get to work at 6 o'clock in the morning to go do their workout and then shower there where there's a shower and go to work. Like, they can come in, roll in at 8, go to their desk, and then at some point, in the middle of the day, peel off and go do a workout and be paid for it.
Must be nice. No wonder everybody's afraid to come forward and expose the corruption in here. They got it made.
I mean, and if you do come forward, then you get put out the door, no pay, and set you up for criminal prosecution, like they did for me, where they tried to get me to lie so they could do the Michael Flynn, charge me with 1001, which is lying to a federal agent. And it's completely they're weaponized against conservative America and employees who express a concern. Not necessarily even conservative employees, just a general employee who says, like, hey, what we're doing is wrong here. They will turn all their attention on that person.
And when you were still an FBI agent and you recorded that conversation, right, with your, would you call him the ASAC, was it?
Yeah, I had meeting with 2 ASACs. It's an assistant special agent in charge. That's like the number 2 ranking position within the division. So I was in the Jacksonville field office, the Jacksonville division. We had a special agent in charge, and she was the top boss, and she had 3 assistant special agents in charge. So like 3 lieutenants.
So when you asked them a question and you had that recorded, if they would have lied to you, could we potentially bring felony charges against them for lying to an FBI agent?
Oh, I mean, that's a great question, man. Oh, well, at the time that they tried to do it to me was actually after I'd already been suspended. So I had my credentials, gun and badge removed. So I wasn't in a law enforcement capacity there. So I was being interrogated. But before that, I think when I talked to the ASACs and they told me that the people on January 6th killed police officers, and I said, no, they didn't. And they said, oh, I need to go back and check the facts. That seems like a pretty straightforward statement that that agent was saying that police officers were killed by protesters on January 6th, when in fact that didn't happen factually. So maybe that's a lie. But I was I actually did my due diligence before I went in there. I mean, obviously you want to cover your butt, and I figured they would be recording the interview because they want to memorialize that for themselves to cover their butts. And I'm in Florida, so that's a two-party consent state. So nobody said it was going to be recorded, and there's a FBI policy that you're not supposed to record anything. But they all put their phones on the table, and they asked me the same questions over and over and over again, and tried to get me to say something different. And then at one point, I actually said, I said the same answer, and then they tried to do the whole, well, before you said this, but now you're saying that. And I looked at them, I was like, no. Before I said this, and I'm still saying this, because they were just guys who hadn't done an interview for years, and they were just not skilled. They just knew that was a trick, and they just didn't have the goods to do it on me. But I checked with a guy who's certified in the state of Florida, and I'd done my own research, and I was fairly confident. There's a law enforcement exemption. Obviously, you can, if you're acting in a law enforcement capacity, the two-party consent requirement for recording a conversation is waived. And I was contending that my executive management was attempting to compel me to violate people's rights, which is a crime. Mm-hmm. And I was there as a law enforcement officer and memorializing conversation where these guys did try to make me do that. So I think that's a violation of law as well.
Absolutely. Now, is there anything else that you think that we've missed here, or at what time do you want to jump back into this interview?
We can jump back in if the break's over. Let's do it.
You want to pick up right after the break, or you want to go live? Because I know we're a few minutes behind.
Let's go live. I think there was a Dem that was first coming out who was just going to scream Trump, Trump, Trump. So if it's a Republican now, it's probably might be more some meat.
Got it.
Later, DOJ and FBI recover an additional 38 classified documents from Mar-a-Lago. Your FBI, our FBI. A lawyer for Mr. Trump signed a statement at that point. To the best of her knowledge, she said all classified materials had been returned. But surveillance footage, of course, showed that wasn't the case. And in August of 2022, a federal judge approved a warrant to search Mar-a-Lago. This was not a raid, as some on the other side would like to have a pity party for Mr. Trump. This was not a raid. They then retrieved another 102 documents with classified markings. 300 and some documents taken by the president, improperly stored, and then tried to evade and obstruct justice, as is alleged. Do you think that the FBI went over the top or was out of line in your participation in retrieving these documents?
Well, again, I don't want to discuss the specifics of a pending case, but from everything I've seen, our folks in this case have proceeded honorably and in strict compliance with our policies, our rules, and our best practices.
And it seems from what overview we can do, I'm taking a look here at the affidavit to get the search warrant to go on in. It was one of your special agents assigned from the Washington field office. Obviously, we don't know who, but pointed out and made the case for probable cause to go in and to collect these documents. So let's take a look at the flip side. What's the harm? What's the danger to either human assets, your employees, national security, or Mr. Trump holding on to, moving around, showing top secret documents? Where's the harm? 18 months of this going on.
Well, again, respectfully, I'm not going to comment or weigh in on a case that's now pending in front of federal judges, but speaking more generally, the rules governing the handling of classified information are there for a reason, and people need to be very mindful of those rules. And unfortunately, the FBI has, as a steady part of its docket, a number of investigations involving mishandling. And the reason those rules are there is because classified information, if it gets into the wrong hands, can put human sources in jeopardy. It can put other kinds of intelligence collection at jeopardy. It can jeopardize our partnerships with foreign liaison services, which are really the lifeblood of the intelligence community in many ways. So it's serious business, and it needs to be taken seriously. But again,
Steve, you want to drop in and give a comment on that?
No, it's just the entire premise is stupid. The one thing I did overlook though before was the Christopher Wray part where he was asked, Jim Jordan asked him about not being paid for 10 months, whether or not his wife would be mad at him for that. And he laughed and then kind of shook his head and sort of answer. That needs to be in every campaign ad in 2024 for every Republican for office. That is just the disconnection between him and the average American. That's Garrett O'Boyle. And obviously Marcus Allen hadn't been paid for a year and a half, but just kind of laughed it off. Like, oh, that's absurd. Well, I mean, I can tell you two dudes who are living through that right now, and you might claim to be aware of their names. I know you know who their names are, Christopher Wray, because I know you're briefed on them at a very high level, but you just have no compassion or no empathy for their circumstances. And neither man has done what they've been accused of doing. At least I'll admit, I looked at the employee handbook improperly. Guilty. I'll take that.
Yep.
But those guys did not do what you accused them of doing and suspended them for indefinitely.
Great. Thank you. Let's jump back to it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not speaking about a particular case. I'm just speaking general.
I very much appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, but I do want to just point out to the world, none of this is normal. It was not normal what took place here. And I yield back.
Generally, it yields back. Bedroom, bathroom, ballroom. How about a box in a
Mr.
garage?
Chairman, Mr.
Beach
Chairman.
house in Delaware and the Biden Center. I don't think those are skips
Mr. Chairman,
either.
point of order.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk about China, but before I do, I want to just comment, in the last exchange with Mr. Roy, I heard you say certain practices were outrageous to you, and I appreciated that. And I think maybe we would have liked to have heard more of that this hearing, about things, acknowledging failures. I realize there are a lot of positives to talk about, but we do as a committee want to work with you. When Chairman Jordan asked why so much is redacted in a document, could we perhaps sit down with you, even if it's privately, and you tell us why that needs to be the case? If we ask for the names of these employees that were behind the Catholic issue in Virginia, can we get a commitment that we'll eventually get those names? I didn't hear that in that exchange with Mr. Jordan.
Well, you certainly have my commitment that we will work collaboratively with the committee. We obviously have rules that govern what we can share, and we have to be mindful of those too. But in my experience, that's what the longstanding accommodation process between the executive branch, especially law enforcement agencies, and Congress is there for. And we absolutely will pursue that in good faith. I know we've been providing an enormous amount of information, and if there are places that we can do better on that, we want to try to do better on that, if again, consistent with our rules. I'm very mindful of the fact that the whole reason I'm in this job is because my predecessor was fired, and in a fairly scathing Inspector General report, one of the things he was criticized for was sharing more information, both with the public and frankly with Congress, than was consistent with federal rules.
Thank you. Thank you for that pledge. Now to China. Most Americans don't realize, I don't think, that U.S. companies doing business in China are required to have joint venture agreements. That's been around since 2017 or 18, I believe. And it requires the Chinese Communist Party to have political cells within these enterprises, American enterprises in China. In the last few weeks, it has come to my attention that they've taken that up a notch and actually gone further, the Chinese have, and said that not only must they be present and have access, but they now control these American businesses. So they're, in essence, nationalizing American enterprises in China. And the CEOs I've talked to are afraid to say something. They say they've come to the FBI. The FBI, I think, is aware of this. I'm about to turn it over to you. My question is this happening, and what can be done about it? What do we need to do about it?
Well, I think you've put your finger on a very important issue, and frankly, one that does not get the attention that it really deserves. So I appreciate you bringing it up. I will say that, in my view, there is no country, none, that presents a broader, more comprehensive threat to our ideas, our innovation, our economic security than the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. And in many ways, it represents, I think, the defining threat of our era. And when it comes specifically to the business community, while there's no law against joint ventures, the problem that we have is that the Chinese government all too often has exploited those joint ventures to then use them as ways to get improper access to companies' secrets and information.
Do you find that they have stepped it up, though, to where they are, in essence, nationalizing U.S. companies quietly?
In a variety of ways. I hadn't really thought of using that term, but I think you're onto a very important point. I'll give you an example that I think a lot of people in America still don't know about and would be shocked to hear, which is that really any company of any size in China is required by Chinese law to have what they quaintly call a committee, which is essentially a cell inside the company whose sole function is to ensure that company's compliance with Chinese Communist Party orthodoxy. If we tried to install something like that in American companies, or if the British tried to do it in British companies or any number of other places, people would go out of their minds, and rightly so.
Agreed. Well, thank you. I'd like to work with you more on that, and I'd yield the balance of my time to the chairman. Thank you.
But that's exactly what you did. And the judge said it last week. Every week you were meeting with big tech companies saying, hey, look at this. This violates your policy. Take this speech of Americans down. You were doing the same darn thing you just described the Chinese about. And can we put up the email that Mr. Nadler entered into unanimous consent request? Can we put this up from the FBI to Bank of America? Because I want to know something. This is the full email. Go to the bullet point where it says, any historical purchase going back 6 months generally for weapons-related vendor purchase. You see that, Director? You see that bullet point? The one that says any in all caps, that bullet point? This is the email. How did you know? How would you know if it's a firearm purchase? How is the FBI going to know this? Put your mic on, please.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to start engaging on specific correspondence. I don't have the whole string here. As I've said before, my understanding is that our engagement with Bank of America was lawful, but that we also took steps, as we discussed in our earlier exchange.
Well, if it's lawful, why'd you take steps not to use the material? You can't have it both ways.
I disagree with that, actually.
Really?
There are plenty of things that we lawfully can do that we decide are better not to do, and that's my understanding is what happened here.
Wow. Wow. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your public service. Last week in my district and my hometown of El Paso, Texas, a domestic violent extremist was sentenced to 90 consecutive life terms for a horrific attack he carried out on my community on August 3rd, 2019. On that day, he confessed that he drove over 10 hours from his community in East Texas to mine in order to slaughter Mexicans and immigrants. And before he walked into that Walmart, he published his screed online, and he used some of the same ugly xenophobic rhetoric that I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle use. And then he walked into that Walmart with an automatic style weapon and began shooting indiscriminately. He killed 23 people, injured dozens more, and my community remains profoundly impacted by that attack. And the victims and the survivors and the loved ones still live with profound pain and trauma. What is the FBI doing, Director Wray, in response to racially motivated domestic terrorism?
Well, first, let me say I feel your pain. I actually visited the Walmart crime scene shortly after the attack and spent time with our folks on the ground who were processing the crime scene in blistering heat in the parking lot there, and obviously got briefed by the investigative team and met with our local partners, and obviously it was a horrific, tragic event, and the individual stories about some of the individual victims stick with me to this day. As to the broader phenomenon of racially motivated violent extremism, we have done a number of things. We elevated it to a national threat priority back in the summer of 2019, I believe it was, which means that It is squarely in scope of all of our joint terrorism task forces and treated as a priority at the top level. That's our highest level of priority. We also have engaged, we created a domestic terrorism hate crimes fusion cell, and you might wonder what's the point of that. Well, what we found was that sometimes the same acts of violence could either be called a hate crime or it could be called an act of domestic violent extremism. And in the way the FBI is structured, the first is treated by our criminal investigative division, the second is created by, is focused on by our counterterrorism division. And by bringing the two subject matter experts together, we could make sure that we are not letting anything slip through the cracks, and more importantly, we can be proactive in thinking ahead. And that same fusion cell, for example, was then very important in us identifying and preventing a potentially devastating attack against a synagogue outside of Colorado. And it was really one of the first times in recent memory that a hate crimes prosecution was able to be preventative. All too often, unfortunately, those cases are brought after there's a horrific attack. So we were very proud of disrupting that plot.
Thank you so much, Director Wray. I'm also very curious about what steps you've taken to improve coordination between the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security in terms of reporting the domestic terrorism data.
Well, there were a number of places. This gets a little bit technical, but the reports that that Congress called for. I've had a number of engagements with Senator Peters and on the Senate side about this, where data about how many domestic terrorism attacks there had been and which cases there were. I think there were different ways in which the two agencies were what they were counting and so forth. So in order to kind of get better at providing that information as required by Congress, we've worked more and more closely with DHS on ensuring a common set of metrics and so forth to make sure that the reports are getting in on time and that they're complete. We still have some work to do to make them better, but I think we've made significant progress.
I appreciate it. That data is critically important, as you know. I'm just about out of time. Thanks again for your service, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Excuse me, gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Good afternoon, Director Wray. Director, how many sworn special agents are there currently in the United States?
You mean outside the FBI?
Oh, no, in the FBI.
Just in the FBI? I think we have about 14,000 or so FBI special agents.
And they are spread across field offices and resident agencies in the U.S. and in some cases around the world. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Now, as a former federal prosecutor and judge, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of men and women of the FBI from my home state. And one thing that I know and that we've heard in your testimony today is that you all have very broad responsibilities. Is it correct to say that the FBI, among other things, investigates counterterrorism, counterintelligence, cybercrime, public corruption, civil rights offenses, transnational organized crime, violent crime, and domestic terrorism?
And then other things as well, but yes.
Yes. And in addition to that, would you agree with the statement that the Bureau provides important support to local law enforcement agencies around the country on those subjects and others?
I would say indispensable support, and something I hear about. I'm talking with chiefs and sheriffs probably every week in this job since I've started, and if there's one refrain I hear from them consistently is, keep it coming, we need it, can you give us even more help? That's what I hear from them.
Now, I'd like to focus on the subject of domestic terrorism today. And when we talk about domestic terrorism, the Bureau's work includes investigating and bringing to justice those who would do profound harm to the homeland, given the opportunity. And the Bureau has been involved in cases involving hate crimes, violent extremists, and even some of our country's most notorious criminals, like Timothy McVeigh and Ted Kaczynski. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and of course there are many such individuals who have plans to do harm to our homeland that America never hears about because you successfully intercept and prevent before those incidents occur.
Yes, in fact, one of the things that I think people would be surprised to know, because terrorism is not as much in the news as it was during the era when I was serving in the Bush administration in the 9/11 era, but we have, just since I've been director, disrupted attacks against a July 4th parade, in Ohio, any number of attacks against churches and other houses of worship, an attempted attack, a plot to attack a hospital during COVID, the pier in San Francisco in sort of a peak tourism moment, a crowded beach during Memorial Holiday. And these are not all domestic terrorism. Some of them are, and that's important for people to know, some of these are jihadist-inspired terrorist attacks too. And that has not gone away, even though a lot of the public discussion has been about domestic terrorism.
And so here's what I'm hoping you can help us reconcile today. So we know that there are a limited number of agents, a limited number of resources, and a vast responsibility to prevent a broad array of very serious offenses. And what I'd like to do with that in mind is turn your attention to the decision within the Bureau to use investigative resources to investigate and surveil parents who attended school board meetings for the purpose of sharing their concerns about the nature of their children's education and the efficacy of the policies that were being implemented by school boards around the country. Is it correct that in 2021, the FBI created a threat tag specifically designed to identify parents attending school board meetings?
Yes, but I think it's important for people to understand what a threat tag is and is not. It is not what we base investigations on. It's not an investigative tool. It's an administrative function in our system, and it doesn't change anything about how we investigate, tools we use, any of our longstanding standards for predication.
But in those
and you mentioned the whole
circumstances,
resource allocation question.
it is correct, is it not, however, that agents surveilled, that agents did in fact surveil and investigate certain parents who were attending school board meetings?
No, ma'am, that's actually not correct. We opened 25 assessments into reports that were tagged, but none of those involved incidents at school board meetings. And to my knowledge, the FBI has not opened investigations on any parent for exercising speech at school board meetings.
Would you be concerned that to do so would be an infringement or perhaps a chilling on the First Amendment rights of parents to participate freely and openly in those meetings? Do you believe that would be an appropriate function of the Bureau?
I believe that our mission is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And the uphold the Constitution part is very important to me and to our people. And I will say to you the same thing I said to all 56 of our field offices as soon as I read that memo, which is the FBI is not and has never been in the business of policing or investigating speech by parents at school board meetings. And we're not about to start now. We're going to keep doing what we've been doing, and that includes when there's violence, threats of violence, we're going to work with our state and local partners, as we always have on that, and following our normal procedures and our normal investigative steps and our normal standards for predication.
Thank you, Director Wray. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
And the lady yields back. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your service to our country under some pretty difficult circumstances, and we're certainly grateful. I'm certainly grateful. The people of the state that I represent, Colorado, are grateful to the 38,000 members of the FBI team, as you have articulated, that are working every day to keep the American people safe and to keep the people of my state and my community safe. So we're grateful for you being here. This committee obviously has a legitimate role in terms of conducting oversight. Generally, that oversight has extended to the policy areas, the areas of law enforcement that, of course, you are responsible for. Unfortunately, much of the conversation today, and it's disappointing, I think, for those Americans who have been watching, has not been focused on those legitimate areas of inquiry, but instead conspiracy theories and the like. Obviously, as you have been given an opportunity to respond to some of the attacks that have been made against the law enforcement agency that you direct, and the dangerous calls, or at least in my view, the dangerous calls that have been made by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in terms of defunding federal law enforcement, which is deeply dangerous, and you've articulated the many reasons why. I'd like to focus in on two areas that are important to my constituents in Colorado and that I believe are relevant to the work that you do, and that is the fentanyl epidemic and gun violence prevention. With respect to the latter, you may recall you testified in front of the committee previously. I had an opportunity to ask you about an incident that occurred back in 2020 in my state in Colorado In 2021, the GAO issued a report in response to this particular incident. Just by way of background, a gun dealer in Colorado transferred a firearm to an 18-year-old resident of Florida without first verifying the purchaser's age, eligibility, and her state of residence. The gun buyer then threatened to commit a school shooting akin to the mass tragedy that occurred at Columbine High, causing the lockdown and closure of multiple schools in my district back in Colorado. The report recommended, the GAO report, that the FBI strengthen its system for the sale of firearms to out-of-state purchasers. Specifically, it recommended that the FBI update the NICS system to verify the age requirements of an out-of-state firearm purchaser in both the purchaser's state of residence and the state of sale to ensure basic age eligibility. And we've introduced legislation that I believe the Department of Justice is aware of to make that requirement statutory. Wonder if you could expound a bit on whether I'm sure you're aware of the report, whether the FBI has implemented the recommendation that the GAO has made, and if not, the FBI's plans to do so.
Well, I think the specific legislation that would require that is something, as you said, that I think the department is studying, and so I can't weigh in on a specific legislative proposal. When it comes to the specific issue of 18 to 20-year-olds in particular, and gun purchases, that is, of course, the subject of the bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was passed. And there are a number of significant checks that now occur. We started implementing that last October, fully implemented it starting in January. And that provides for enhanced checks for that critical population, the 18 to 20-year-old range, juvenile criminal records, mental health records for that population, and contact, in some ways, most importantly, contact with local law enforcement in that person's community. And I've actually been out to NICS, met with and sat with the operators who process those checks. So I've seen kind of firsthand how it works and the important work it represents. And I think if you were to talk, I'm talking to chiefs and sheriffs all over this country every week, and you will hear from most of them, if you talk to them for very long, you will hear about their concern and our concern about juveniles and violence. I almost guarantee you within the first 10 minutes of any conversation. It's a real problem in this country.
Well, I thank you for your answer, and I think it underscores the importance of the NICS program, and would look forward to perhaps following up with your team on this particular administrative issue of trying to just make sure that the database is working efficiently. Limited time left, but I just want to give you an opportunity. I know we've talked a bit about the fentanyl epidemic devastating communities across the country, certainly in Colorado. It's one of the reasons why we created a fentanyl prevention caucus here in the Congress. It's bipartisan. Representative Issa is one of our co-chairs. Wonder if you just might be able to, for those Americans who are watching, kind of provide us with your sense of some of the trends, the most dangerous and disturbing trends that you think the American people and policymakers should be aware of.
Well, I will say there are a whole bunch of trends, but in the limited time, but because of the importance of this topic, I'll hit a couple. One is, and we were just discussing this recently internally, we are finding over the course of the last year that, maybe even a little less than a year, that almost every gang takedown we have now, and we're doing them all over the country all the time, almost every single one now seems to involve as well a seizure of fentanyl. And we've been doing gang takedowns since Congresswoman Lee was a prosecutor as well. So that's not new, but what is new is that over and over and over again, it seems consistently we're finding fentanyl in these, again, these are violent crime takedowns. The second phenomenon, which is deeply disturbing, and I know the DEA administrator is very concerned about as well, is that we're seeing more and more adulteration or lacing of fentanyl into all sorts of different kinds of prescription drugs that lots of Americans take all the time. And if you think about the phenomenon of the youth of this country, which is itself a problem of getting prescription drugs from their friends or their friends' parents or whatever it happens to be, they may not know that there's potentially a lethal dose of fentanyl in some prescription drug that they're taking. So it just underscores the importance of only getting your prescriptions from an appropriate medical provider.
Gentleman's time is
To us, Steve, what you got, man? I know you got to run here for a few minutes, so
Yeah, I'm at the run. I gotta go talk to Seb Gorka for a little bit about this exact hearing. So
Let's
this
go,
has
man.
been
Good
good.
for you. Get out there, get everywhere.
So Christopher Wray just perjured himself and lied and said that the FBI didn't do any surveillance of parents at school board meetings. I did. Full stop, as he would say. I was sent to do that. So I don't know. I mean, I told them that in the hearing. Matt Gaetz actually had a exchange with me about that. So hopefully they'll come back at him with that because that's just factually inaccurate.
How long do you got, Steve? How many minutes do you have?
I like 15, 20 minutes.
All right, let me hit that record button. Could you say that first thing about Chris Wray again?
Yeah, Christopher Wray just perjured himself in front of the Judiciary Committee of the House because he said that the FBI did not surveil parents at school board meetings. And I can tell you firsthand that we did because I did it. We were sent to surveil people at school board meetings during the unrest that was stemming from all the revelations about pornographic material in the libraries and unrealistic masking standards, and then actual sexual assaults that were going on, like in Loudoun County, Virginia. We were sent to surveil people at a Flagler County school board meeting that was going and expected to be pretty contentious because of some material that was found in the school library. And we went there, went to the parking lot, had a target, documented who he was in communication with, got license plates for anybody who he seemed to be interacting with in the parking lot before they went in, so we could develop those people as potential subjects.
Whoa. And what is if you perjure yourself, doesn't that make you pretty much, isn't it illegal for them to lie to members of Congress, just like it is the FBI? So if he perjures himself, that would be a crime, correct?
It's a crime, yeah. And it's, I don't think it's going to be enforced here. He'll find a way to wriggle out of it and say that he didn't know, he was answering in a different way. But the fact that there was a hearing that I attended 2 months ago where I presented that evidence, and I presented that evidence during my deposition, and then Matt Gaetz brought it out during the hearing. So I was hoping that they would maybe confront him with that. And if Gaetz gets a second chance, he probably will. He's pretty savvy. He's pretty spot on. So I think he'll see that inconsistency with Ray's response compared to ours. And then the guy how about to talk about domestic terrorism? And well, he brings in China and says China is the greatest threat. Okay, that's fine. The why are you telling the country that domestic terrorism is the greatest threat? White supremacy is the greatest threat. Well, why aren't you banging on the China drum? Except now, when you were asked about it in this hearing that hopefully nobody else hears, but the rest of the time you're hitting on people who vote Republican are white supremacy enthusiasts, and white supremacy is the greatest threat to the homeland. Ergo, Republicans are the greatest threat to the homeland. That's not that big of a logical jump to make.
Steve, man, I know you got to run, buddy. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn that into a nice little soundbite here after this stream. So I appreciate it, man. Feel free to stop by if you got time. You're bored later, and we're going to be streaming this till it ends. So if you see it's still on, you want to come back on here, just send me a text and I'll bring it back on, man. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll do, man. See you later.
Thanks, buddy. Later.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Is the southern border secure?
I think the southern border represents a massive security threat.
So what we've heard from you today is that fentanyl has become a really big problem and that you're having to put more resources to it. Is that correct?
Towards fentanyl, yes. Yes, we are.
And the related gangs. I mean, you just retailed some of the story.
Right.
So this all happened over the last couple of years as the border has become unsecure. Is the southern border secure?
Well, again, I want to defer to the Homeland Security, which is responsible for the physical security of the building. I will just tell you from the FBI's perspective that we are seeing all sorts of very serious criminal threats that come from across the border.
And getting worse, correct? You're putting more assets towards it?
We certainly do. We have, as I said...
So it's becoming more of a priority for you?
It is becoming more and more of a priority for us, yes.
So in the Durham report, and we heard from Mr. Durham just a couple weeks ago, he said the FBI failed to uphold the important mission of strict fidelity to the law, and that predates you. Do you agree with that statement that Mr. Durham made?
Yes, I do.
Was Russia collusion a hoax? So in light of the Durham report and that, was Russia collusion a hoax?
What I would say is this. One as to the Durham report itself, and one as to the issue of Russia malign influence. As to the Durham report itself,
be quick.
I will try. The conduct it describes is conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative of who I see the FBI as every day and must not ever be allowed to happen again.
And on the other side?
Second, on the other one, it is not seriously disputed that the Russians, among other foreign adversaries, have attempted to interfere in our elections. And there have been any number of findings to that. In fact, President Trump himself rightly declared a national emergency about foreign interference in our elections in 2018.
So as a result of the actions of James Comey, the disgraced James Comey, and the FBI, they've interfered with the elections in both 2016 and 2020. Will that interference happen again in 2024 by the FBI?
The FBI is not going to be interfering in elections.
They did in 2016.
Well, I don't know that that's what Mr. Durham found. What I would tell you again is that there was conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative.
You can be in denial if you want to.
I'm not in denial,
Mr. Director,
sir.
you can be in denial on this. That's exactly what happened. Last year, the FBI gave a defensive briefing to my home state Senator Johnson, and you can see the slide up there now. And then that defensive briefing was leaked to the Washington Post. Who ordered that briefing?
So defensive briefings, when it comes to election matters, including in the last administration, under a procedure set up by the last administration, are an interagency process coordinated by the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And the way that works is the interagency concludes that a defensive briefing is appropriate, and the FBI is given information from whatever intelligence community agency supplies it, and then we provide it. Defensive briefings, it's important to understand.
Senator Johnson, that's his quote. He's up there with you and Hunter Biden. I knew it was a setup. And he asked you this question back in November of last year, and he said, I knew it was a setup. And that goes back to the point about interfering in elections. Senator Johnson was one of the most vulnerable Republican incumbents, if not the most vulnerable Republican incumbent, that was a target of the Democrats in the 2022 election. And then you see this briefing happen, and he knew what was happening, that there was someone or some people within the FBI and the intelligence arena that were going after him. Did Joe Biden take payments from Burisma or any other foreign companies as vice president, president, or private citizen Biden?
As you may know, there is an ongoing investigation being led by the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, Mr. Weiss, appointed by President Trump in the last administration, that our Baltimore field office is working with, and I would refer you to him as to what, if anything, can be shared.
So the president is under, investigation.
I'm not going to confirm or speak to who is or isn't under investigation for what. I'm simply going to tell you.
So he's not under investigation?
I didn't say that either. By longstanding department policy and practice, I'm not going to be confirming or denying who is or isn't under investigation or for what.
Thank you. I'll close with this. Russia collusion started it, Mr. Chairman, and the targeting and the suppression and the censorship has continued until this point. We need to thoroughly review what the FBI is doing, and at a minimum, I will be allowing FISA to sunset if we're not going to see significant reforms in the agency. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Just so you guys are aware of what's going on here, you guys want to know what Russian collusion looks like? I've been making these whiteboard videos, and I'm going to have a mini series rolling out. You want to see how obvious it was of what they did to President Trump? Check out this video. We'll jump right back into this right
but
after.
Mueller and his team doubled down even more. That same day, FBI agents were at it again, greeting George Papadopoulos at the airport. You remember Papadopoulos, right? He was the youngest advisor on the Trump team who, according to the FBI timeline, kicked off Operation Crossfire Hurricane by allegedly telling Alexander Downer, the former Australian High Commissioner to the UK, that Russians had some kind of damaging material about Hillary Clinton. Papadopoulos claimed he has no memory of saying this. and multiple efforts by the FBI to use informants to catch Papadopoulos in some kind of incriminating statement, including the use of former CIA asset and FBI source Stefan Halper and a mysterious honeypot spy, had failed. Not only failed, but when transcripts emerged in April of 2020 of Papadopoulos' late 2016 conversations with an FBI spy targeting him, the transcripts were exculpatory, as Papadopoulos repeatedly denied any collusion efforts with Russians. But the airport meeting was the Bureau's last attempt to really nail him. According to Papadopoulos' book, Deep State Target, the investigators rifled through his luggage repeatedly and seemed very frustrated by the results of their search. Were they looking for the $10,000 in cash, which Papadopoulos had left in Greece? Did they think he would bring that money into the country without declaring it, making him vulnerable to serious charges and huge fines? It sure seemed like it to Papadopoulos, who was placed under arrest. The next day, Mueller's vaunted prosecutors were late filing charges against their new target. When they showed up, they hit him with 2 charges of lying to an FBI agent and obstruction of justice that could have been ready months earlier. Mueller and company were hoping to file much heavier charges to really put pressure on Papadopoulos to flip on members of Trump's campaign and save himself. But when he showed up at the airport, that avenue was closed off, leading to a quickie arrest on other charges. This same day, news broke that top FBI lawyer James Baker was under investigation for leaking Russiagate information to the media. We know that this was also the month that Mueller's team stretched its net, contacting General Michael Flynn and his family for the first time and putting former Trump personal attorney Michael Cohen in its sights. But of all of this summer fun, nothing came close to creating the damning optics of meeting with a real, live Russian with ties to Russian intelligence at Trump Tower. Yes, the Manafort raid was impressive. It gave the impression of Mueller zeroing in on the Trump campaign chairman, but that was nothing compared to Trump's own son and son-in-law taking a meeting in which they hoped to get intel on Hillary Clinton. That was the golden ticket to prove collusion. And even though Mueller knew it didn't happen because the translator in the room, who had no horse in the race, said it didn't, the special counsel prosecutors played it to the hilt, knowing it would make life that much harder for the president and hoping it would create pressure that would lead to a breakthrough that would let them prove a case that was unprovable. Of course, they couldn't do it, not even after spending $32 million of taxpayers' money on the investigation and its epic encyclopedia of empty allegations, the Mueller report. But that's because you can't buy proof that never existed.
So let me recap what happened there. The FBI was involved with framing President Donald Trump, and they were going after every member on Trump's team. So Papadopoulos went over to, I forget where it was, over in England to meet with another G6 or spy agent, or forget the guy's name. But during that meeting, for some reason, Papadopoulos was given $10,000. And the reason that they gave him that $10,000, if you ever notice, like it's exactly $10,000 on the dot. So if you move more than $10,000, you have to fill out tax paperwork, whatever. They were trying to frame him. So the FBI was at the airport waiting, thinking that Papadopoulos would have came back with that $10,000 in his suitcase, but he didn't. He smelt something was funny. He left that 10 G's over there. And then when he came back, the FBI agents were raiding his suitcase, tearing it apart. Like, where's this 10,000? They were trying to entrap him and get him to cross state lines without technically claiming that he had just made or earned an extra $10,000. Pretty shady, right? And then the entire time, Mueller knew that there was no collusion. Mueller knew it. The FBI was briefed on it. They all frickin' knew it. When you guys are going to see this mini board series, it's going to blow your mind. I'll quit yapping and get back into it, but it is so overwhelmingly obvious how rotten to the core our FBI is. And all they do is lie, cheat, steal, and try to rig elections. And they're doing it in 2024 again against President Trump because they know they cannot beat him fairly. Nobody can beat him fairly.
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Wray, for your service and your patience. In 2018, 10 leaders of Temple Beth Or, a synagogue in my district, received threats mailed to their homes. These threats led to the cancellation of programming and continued a disturbing trend of rising anti-Semitism in North Carolina. In the years since, my state has confronted new threats from domestic terrorists at minority institutions. This past April, a man was arrested on the campus of North Carolina A&T State University, the largest HBCU in the country, with multiple firearms and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, as well as a makeshift explosive, brass knuckles, crossbow, knives, and other weapons.
What a loser.
Thankfully, this man was arrested before he could cause any harm, but the threat he posed to the campus mirrors threats we've seen to HBCUs around the country. In North Carolina and across the United States, we've also seen increased threats against reproductive care providers in the wake of the Dobbs decision last summer. And North Carolina recently enacted a 12-week abortion ban that has severely restricted access to reproductive health care in my state, and people often have to go through threatening crowds to be able to access the care that they need. While some in North Carolina have highlighted vandalism of crisis pregnancy centers since the overturn of Roe, they failed to acknowledge or respond to the increase in violence at abortion providers. Does the FBI currently provide anti-terrorism training to civilians, to HBCUs, places of worship, religious centers, individuals providing abortion services, LGBTQ groups, and does that training include a domestic terrorism component so that they can help you and law enforcement?
Well, we do a whole bunch of things to engage with the community, institutions that are targeted with violence. That include a number of the kinds of institutions you mentioned. I know in particular we work very, very closely with the Jewish community, which has the unfortunate distinction of, despite the percentage that they represent of the American population, of being way disproportionately targeted. So we spend a lot of time engaging with them around the country and nationally. We also spent a lot of time engaging with campus law enforcement, including at HBCUs. We spent a lot of time on that, especially last year with the bomb threats that were coming in. I was just recently with all of the campus law enforcement leaders from around the country just the last couple of weeks. And we certainly try to provide awareness to different kinds of institutions about how to deal with potential mass casualty events and things like that. We also provide information about things to be on the lookout for in people's communities. I should say, though, when you mention on the abortion side, reproductive facilities, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't also point out that there has been a pretty significant uptick in violence going the other way since the Dobbs decision. And in fact, most of the investigations that we've opened since the Dobbs decision, probably about 70% of them have been violence against pro-life facilities. We recently had a significant charge in the Madison, Wisconsin area of a guy who was trying to firebomb a pro-life facility there. So we're out there with communities across the spectrum.
Okay. And how would an investigation differ if it's domestic terrorism as opposed to just an ordinary criminal case?
Well, our investigation focuses on the violence first and foremost. I think there is no domestic terrorism statute. There's no offense of domestic terrorism, but we define domestic terrorism for purposes of opening an investigation as having three things: violence or threat of violence, in furtherance of an ideology. In other words, that's what's driving the violence in that particular instance, and in violation of federal criminal law. If we have those three things, enough evidence to indicate that that might be what's going on, then we would treat that as a domestic terrorism investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Lady yields back. We got votes, Director. We're going to do one more on our side, then we'll take a break and come back for the remaining members. The gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Yes, Director Wray, we have established that the FBI and other federal agencies met weekly with executives from major social media companies, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn, and Yahoo and Verizon. Were you involved in any of those meetings, yes or no?
I wasn't involved in the kind of meetings that you're talking about, or I didn't participate, I guess, in meetings like that.
Okay. Are these meetings still occurring, and if so, how frequently?
Well, right now, as you may know, there is a preliminary injunction that's been entered.
Prior to the preliminary injunction, were these weekly meetings taking place?
I don't know if weekly meetings occurred, again, before the injunction, but certainly we've been very open about this, engaged with social media companies.
Does the FBI intend to continue to have such meetings leading up to the 2024 election to police election-related speech?
Well, we're not going to be policing election-related speech.
That's what you previously did.
I do not agree with that description.
Okay, well,
of
here's
we
what
did.
I would say. This committee has learned that the FBI acted to, quote, discredit leaked information about Hunter Biden before and after it was published, that, quote, Twitter's contact with the FBI was constant and pervasive, and as if it were a subsidiary, and that, quote, a surprisingly high number are requests by the FBI for Twitter to take action on election misinformation, even involving joke tweets from low follower accounts. Are you aware that that has been reported?
I am aware of some of what the committee has found in its
Okay.
report. But I will add that I'm not sure I agree with the findings.
But that's what we found. Director Wray, you and I both know that the federal government is forbidden from doing indirectly what it cannot do directly. In other words, neither you nor the FBI have any legal authority to circumvent the First Amendment by using a surrogate to do your dirty work. Yet that is exactly what you have been doing. The Bureau, under your watch, has been using proxies to violate the First Amendment. Were you the person who gave the orders to use these social media companies to violate violate Americans' First Amendment rights?
Again, I don't agree with your description of our engagement with social media companies.
So who made the decision to use social media companies as a proxy to suppress the First Amendment rights of American citizens?
Because I don't believe that's what we did, I'm not sure there's anyone that would have made such a decision.
Do you really expect the American public to believe that you were not involved in the decisions related to using social media companies to suppress the First Amendment rights of American citizens?
I can't help what people will believe or not. I can only speak to what the facts are.
Was anyone ever fired or otherwise reprimanded for pursuing mass censorship? In other words, has anybody been held accountable for taking the actions that were described in the decision by the district court out of Louisiana?
Well, the district court's decision just came out on July 4th,
Has
as I
anybody been
recall.
reprimanded or held
And
accountable
at the
for what is?
moment, we have issued guidance to everyone in the organization who could be affected as
Has
to how to
anyone been-
follow that. And
has
so
anyone been
I'm not going to
reprimanded?
speak to personnel matters because we have not made any such determination at this stage.
Mr. Wray, I have some letters from Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul that were sent to you on April 20th and June 20th requesting a meeting to discuss the Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate's work investigating the origins of SARS COVID-19. Your office has never responded to these letters. Do you intend to respond to Senators Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul to find out more information about the origin of COVID-19?
Well, we try hard to respond to all correspondence we get from the Hill. We get a lot.
I
I'll have
assume
to
you'll be
check.
responding to
My
this.
intention is that we would have an appropriate response. Sometimes our responses, by longstanding procedure, our responses have to go through the department before they go out, so it could be that it's held up there, but I don't know that that's,
So
I don't know if that's the case in these particular ones.
Senators Graham and Paul should be receiving a response from
Some
your
kind of
office pretty
response.
soon. Okay.
As you may know, we were the only agency in the intelligence community until more recently when the Department of Energy did as well to reach the assessment that in our folks' view, we thought
I
it was more
understand,
likely to
Mr.
be a
Wray.
lab leak.
Okay. Mr. Wray, from the Twitter files, Missouri versus Biden disclosures, the Durham investigation and report, and exposure and collapse of the Russian collusion hoax, the American people fully understand that there is a two-tier justice system that has been weaponized to persecute people based on their political beliefs, and that you have personally worked to weaponize the FBI against conservatives. I asked Mr. Durham about this, to which he answered, I don't think that things can go too much further with the view that law enforcement, particularly the FBI or Department of Justice, runs a two-tiered system of justice. The nation can't stand under those circumstances. Director Wray, what are you prepared to do to reform federal law enforcement in a manner which earns back the trust of the American people?
Well, first off, I would disagree with your characterization of the FBI and certainly your description of my own approach. The idea that I'm biased against conservatives seems somewhat insane to me, given my own personal background. As to how we are approaching our work of protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution, it starts with me having emphasized to all of our folks over and over and over again in everything we do that we need to do the right thing in the right way, and that means following the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it. It starts, then goes on from there to all kinds of enhanced procedures, safeguards, approvals, double checks, triple checks, record-keeping requirement, accountability policies, funding of new functions like an Office of Internal Audit that didn't exist before, the installation of an entirely new leadership team from my predecessor, and where I can take action, where we can take action to hold people accountable by removing people from the chain of command.
Gentlelady's time has
referring
expired,
people-
Director. We're going to take a 30-minute break for votes. We will be back. I'm going to try to start right at 2:15.
Unanimous consent to introduce
Without
to
objections.
the record.
Without objection, so be entered. We'll start with Ms. Bush and then Mr. Bishop on our side when we return. We'll stand in recess for approximately 30 minutes.
We got a few minutes. I'm a little bit ahead, so we won't have to wait the full 30 minutes. So I'm going to jump back to that. I'm going to jump back in a little ways and go back to kind of towards the beginning and see what we missed. Then we'll just jump back over here in a few minutes. So let's jump back over here.
Wearing a hat. They're walking in front of the DNC, which is out of the view on the right-hand side. You'll see him come into view. He goes to one police car. He goes to another police car. He's holding a backpack. He's got a mask on. He's talking to the police. And within a minute, they start scrambling. You'll see the camera turn to the pipe bomb, the location of the pipe bomb. By the way, that's, I believe, the Metro police are now getting out of their car, and that's Vice President-elect's detail in the black SUV, I believe, parked about 30 feet from the pipe bomb, eating lunch. Okay, now we go over to the location of the pipe bomb. The cameras are scrambling. It appears to me that that's not a coincidence, that the person with the backpack who walked by that bench and then went up to the police and the detail didn't do that accidentally. They had a purpose in mind, and that what transpired after that was the result of information that person gave to them. If that person found the pipe bomb, would they be a suspect?
Well, again, I don't want to speculate about specific individuals. I will tell you that we have done thousands of interviews, reviewed something like 40,000 video files, of which this is one, assessed 500-something tips.
Have you interviewed that
the
person?
Devices. We have conducted all logical investigative steps and interviewed all logical individuals at this
Then
point.
you need, it's 900 days. You need to tell us what you found, because we're finding stuff you haven't released into the public. In my remaining minute, I want to turn to another issue. George Hill, former FBI supervisory intelligence analyst in the Boston field office, told us that the Bank of America, with no legal process, gave to the FBI gun purchase records with no geographical boundaries for anybody that was a Bank of America customer. Is that true?
Well, what I do know is that a number of business community partners all the time, including financial institutions, share information with us about possible criminal activity, and my understanding is that that's fully lawful. In the
Did you ask for that information?
In the specific instance that you're asking about, my understanding is that that information was shared with field offices for information only, but then recalled to avoid even the appearance of any kind of overreach. But my understanding is that that's a fully lawful process.
Was there a warrant involved?
Again, my understanding is that the institution in question shared information with us, as happens all the time.
Did you request the information?
I can't speak to the specifics.
Okay, well, we've got an email where it says the FBI did give the search queries to Bank of America, and Bank of America responded to the FBI and gave over this information without a search warrant. Do you believe there's any limitation on your ability to obtain gun purchase data or purchase information for people who aren't suspects from banks without a warrant?
Well, now you're asking a legal question, which I would prefer to defer to the lawyers, since I'm not practicing as one right now, including the department. But what I will tell you is that my understanding is that the process by which we receive information from business community partners across a wide variety of industries, including financial institutions, sharing information with us about possible criminal activity is something that is fully lawful under current federal law.
It may be lawful, but it's not constitutional. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Wray, for being here. I think it's actually sad that the majority is engaging in conspiracy theories and efforts to try and discredit one of the premier law enforcement agencies in the United States in the effort to try and, without really any evidence, make the case that the FBI is somehow opposed to conservative views. In my view, actually, I'm concerned that the FBI has been reluctant to do its job when it comes to the former president. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put in the record an article from the Washington Post. FBI resisted opening probe into Trump's role in January 6th for more than a year.
Without objection.
Director Wray, would you disagree with the premise of this article that the FBI delayed in looking at Mr. Trump himself? The January 6th committee, and I was a member, did find that the ex-president was the center of a wide-ranging conspiracy to overturn the election. Did the FBI start looking right after January 6th at the ex-president?
I'm sorry, I just lost the last part of your question there.
Did the FBI start looking at the ex-president's role in January 6th, starting January 7th or closely to that time?
Well, let me start with, I'm not in the business of kind of commenting or engaging on the truth or falsity of newspaper articles. And in this particular instance, as I'm sure you can appreciate, there is an ongoing, very important ongoing special counsel investigation that's now in court. And so not only do I not want to talk about the ongoing investigation, the internal deliberations related to it are even more sensitive.
I respect that you cannot discuss ongoing investigations. Let me turn to another item. I mean, there's been criticism, and the ranking member went through the scenario leading up to the warrant for the documents at Mar-a-Lago. But I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put an article from the Washington Post. Showdown before the raid, FBI agents and prosecutors argued over Trump.
Objection.
It's pretty clear from this article that there was a resistance on the part of the FBI to actually look at the president or pursue that case vigorously. And although you can't comment on it, the article does suggest that FBI agents want to just close the case because the ex-president made an assertion that a search had been made. Now, we had Mr. D'Antuono in as a witness, and he testified 4 times that the Mar-a-Lago search had adequate probable cause. Do you agree with that statement?
That the search had probable cause?
Correct.
Yes.
Thank you. And so you don't have any dispute that there was probable cause for this warrant. I just want to say, before going to my next question, that over and over again, the FBI delayed and showed unprecedented caution before investigating the ex-president, even when there was a potential threat to national security. That's my view. That's very far from the assertion that there was unfair targeting.
Can I, on that point, if I may, while I can't discuss any specific investigation, my expectation for all of our investigations repeatedly communicated to all of our people and this is especially important in sensitive investigations, is that our folks take great pains to be rigorous, professional, objective, following all our policies and procedures, and do the work in the right way. And sometimes that's frustrating to others.
My time is almost up, and I want to ask you another question. In the Senate hearing, in response to Senator Wyden's question of whether the FBI is currently purchasing Americans' location data, you indicated that it was limited to data derived from internet advertising. It's since been reported that the FBI has admitted it bought U.S. location data. Is the FBI purchasing location data from commercial sources without a warrant?
This is an area that requires a little more precision and context for me to be able to answer that fully, so let me have my staff follow back up with you so that I make sure that I don't leave something important out.
I'll just close with the FBI had 3.4 million backdoor searches of the FISA database without a warrant in 2021. Can you say whether the FBI is continuing to search the FISA database without a warrant for Americans?
Well, if you're asking about our use of 702 queries,
I am.
Those are, there is no warrant requirement under the Fourth Amendment for those queries. It's fairly well settled. The 3.4 million figure that you're talking about, I guess I would say a couple things. One, that's not 3.4 million people. That's 3.4 million search terms or query terms. Second, that's not those are not queries in violation of rules. Those are just queries under the
My time has expired, but the committee will look into the warrant requirement later.
Sure will. You sure will. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
The American people need to understand what just happened. My Democrat colleague just asked the director of the FBI whether or not they are buying information about our fellow Americans, and the answer is, well, we'll just have to get back to you on that. It sounds really complicated, but I have other questions. I'm sitting here with my father. I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I am sitting here waiting for the call with my father. Sounds like a shakedown, doesn't it, Director?
I'm not going to get into commenting on that.
You seem deeply uncurious about it, don't you? Almost suspiciously uncurious. Are you protecting the Bidens?
Absolutely not. The FBI does not and has no interest in
You won't answer the
protecting
question
anyone
about whether or not
politically.
that's a shakedown, and everybody knows why you won't answer it. Because to the millions of people who will see this, they know it is. And your inability to acknowledge that is deeply revealing about you. But let's go from the uncurious to the downright nosy. How many illegal FISA queries have occurred under your leadership of the FBI?
Well, there are reports that have come out with different numbers about compliance incidents.
More than 1 million illegal ones? Because that's what the Inspector General said. The Inspector General said that in the 3.4 million of these queries, more than 1 million were in error. Do you have any basis to disagree with that assessment by the Inspector General?
I'm not sure actually that's a correct characterization of the Inspector General's findings on that.
Well, the internet will remind you of that in moments. But let's now go to what the court said. The court said it was over 200,000 that have occurred on your watch. Do you have any basis to disagree with that assessment?
Again, I don't have the number as I sit here right now. What I can
Seems
tell
like
you,
a number you should know. How many times the FBI is breaking the law under your watch, especially if it's like over 1 million, to not know that number? And I'm worried about your veracity on the subject as well. Play the video.
letters for
You going to the
investigation
FISA
of
court?
the Capitol.
Or you
I don't
going-
believe FISA is remotely implicated in our investigation.
So there, Senator Lee's asking you whether or not FISA was in any way involved in your January 6th investigation, and you say no. Was that truthful?
I said that I did not believe it was.
Okay, so now let's pull up what the court said, which was something a little different than what you said. So here, nope, that's not the right one. Yeah, here we go. Right there, it says, the government has reported additional significant violations of the querying standard including several relating to the January 6, 2021 breach of the Capitol. So I guess the question, Director Wray, is did you not know when you were answering these questions that the FBI was engaging in these illegal searches, or did you perjure yourself to Senator Lee?
I certainly didn't perjure myself. At the time that I testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I didn't have that piece of information. I will add...
Well, that was a court order. You didn't have that piece of information because the court hadn't yet rendered a judgment. Did you not know when you gave the untruthful answer before Senator Lee that this was going on?
It was a truthful answer. I did not believe FISA had been involved in the January 6th
But it was.
investigation.
So you didn't... The answer is the FBI has broken so bad that people can go and engage in queries that when you come before the Congress to answer questions, you're like blissfully ignorant. You're blissfully ignorant as to the unlawful queries. You're blissfully ignorant as to the Biden shakedown regime. And it just seems like it gets into a kind of a creepy place as well. Go to our next image on what the court said. Like, just so the American people realize, the court has smacked you down ruling FBI personnel apparently conducted queries for improper personal reasons. People were looking themselves up. They were looking their ex-lovers up. Who has been held accountable or fired as a consequence of the FBI using the FISA process as their like creepy personal snoop machine?
There have been instances in which individuals have had disciplinary action and who
Name
are no
them.
longer with it. I can't get into it here, but we can follow back up with
But don't you
that.
see that that's kind of the thing, Director Wray, that you preside over the FBI that has the lowest level of trust in the FBI's history. People trusted the FBI more when J. Edgar Hoover was running the place than when you are. And the reason is because you don't give straight answers. You give answers that later a court deems aren't true. And then at the end of the day, you won't criticize an obvious shakedown when it's directly in front of us. And it appears as though you're whitewashing the conduct of corrupt people.
Respectfully, Congressman, in your home state of Florida, the number of people applying to come work for us and devote their lives working for us is up over 100%.
We're deeply proud of them, and they deserve better than you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Director Wray. I thank you for continuing to serve with all of these attempts to sully your name, suggest you've committed crimes, when you've done an excellent job as FBI director. I don't agree with everything you've done, but mostly I do, and I think the FBI is our premier law enforcement agency, and I support law enforcement. To attack the FBI is to attack law enforcement in general. A few days after Mar-a-Lago, there was some individual went after the Cincinnati headquarters of the FBI. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you think that came about?
So the incident that you're asking about was obviously deeply disturbing. We had an individual wearing a tactical vest, armed with an AR-style rifle and a nail gun, who attempted to forcibly enter and attack our Cincinnati field office. A subsequent review of the subject's devices and online postings identified a pretty striking FBI, anti-federal law enforcement hostility. He was calling on others to kill federal law enforcement, claiming that he felt he was fighting in his words, civil war. And it's unfortunately part of a broader phenomenon that we have seen, not just against the FBI, and this is important to add, but against law enforcement all across the country. Not just against law enforcement professionals themselves, which is appalling enough, but calling for attacks against their families, which is truly despicable.
And that man eventually was captured and eliminated, was he not?
Yes.
A few days later, was the Arizona FBI department the subject of armed violence, or not violence, but armed protesters?
Well, I know that our Phoenix field office has had a number of very concerning security incidents where people attempted to attack or breach the facility. I can't remember the dates of when that happened, but...
All of this has happened kind of in the same sphere. It's been information that's been put out on social media and in just general, and by members of the Congress, questioning the FBI, questioning law enforcement in general, and this has had a deleterious effect on safety of FBI officials, and you said others like justice. There was a story the other day, I believe, about people involved in the prosecution of the former president and threats to them, the DOJ personnel as well as FBI. Is that something that's going on presently? Is there efforts to have a unit at the FBI maybe look into how to protect and defend law enforcement personnel who are threatened with violence?
We did stand up a whole dedicated unit to focus on threats to FBI individuals, FBI employees, and FBI facilities because of the uptick that we saw over that time period.
The January 6th, was beyond a weaponization of government. It was a nuclearization of government against the government. I believe I heard that you said that you didn't have any prior notice or reason to believe that there would be such an event on January 6th. Is that correct?
We did not, to my knowledge at least, have prior knowledge of an attempt, a violent overthrow and breach of the Capitol building itself. Certainly we were concerned about and put out a number of products, intelligence products, to partners and others warning of the potential for violence more generally on that date.
So there have been, I think Tucker Carlson and some of the members' colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said that Wray Epps was a secret government agent in helping encourage this crime so as to make the president look bad. Do you have any knowledge of Wray Epps being a secret government agent?
No. I will say this notion that somehow the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources and agents is ludicrous and is a disservice to our brave, hardworking, dedicated men and women.
Director, I agree with you. I think the FBI has some of the most talented law enforcement people in our nation and in the world. And they are concerned about safety. They tend to, as I understand it, lean Republican, but they do their job down the line. And that's what they're supposed to do. I'm happy we have the FBI operating in Memphis and other places to work with our police departments and joint units to protect our citizens. And I thank you for your service to the United States. And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Director, I'm going to follow up on my colleague from Memphis. How many individuals were either FBI employees or people that the FBI had made contact with were in the January 6th entry of the Capitol and surrounding area?
So I really need to be careful here talking about where we have or have not used confidential human sources.
Was there one or more? Was there
anything.
one or more individuals that would fit that description on January 6th that were in or around the Capitol?
I believe there is a filing in one of the January 6 cases that can provide a little more information about this, and I'm happy to see if we can follow back up with you.
I just want an answer. Was there one or more? I mean, you would know if there was at least one individual who worked for the FBI who entered the Capitol on that day.
I can't, again, I just can't speak to that here, but I'm happy to get the court filing that.
Look, it's been
I think
2
deals with this
years,
issue.
and you're now come before us. The gentleman asks these questions, makes all kinds of insinuations, and you nod your head yes, and then I ask you simply, was there one or more? And you won't answer that. So I'm going to make the assumption that there was more than one, more than 5, more than 10, and that you're ducking the question because you don't want to answer for the fact that you had at least one and somehow missed understanding that some of the individuals were very dangerous and that there were others inciting individuals to enter the Capitol after others broke windows. So I'm just going to move on because I think it is time to move on past January 6th. I just, seems that the other side won't. You're a near cabinet level individual. You enjoy a term in Senate confirmation. Do you feel comfortable speaking to other members, either cabinet level or sub-cabinet level, when appropriate, to resolve problems within the government?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so when the FBI censored the United States government, you wouldn't have to just take it down by calling Meta or Google, would you?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm following the question.
Are you familiar with the official verified Russian language account of the United States Department of State that was taken down at your agency's request?
That doesn't ring a bell as I sit here right now, no.
Okay, well, now you have something to take back and look at. Okay. Because in fact, in this bundle that SBU constantly was submitting to various agencies was in fact a Russian language statement of a government. Literally, you took down the free speech of the Department of State.
So,
yes, go ahead.
You mentioned SBU. I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing, but I will endeavor to provide a little more context, at least as to SBU.
Yes.
I believe what you may be referring to, but I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing, is that when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, which is a long-standing good partner of the FBI, asked us for help on a whole range of things. And one of those things was to contact U.S. companies on their behalf because the Russians, the invasion, had cut off the Ukrainians' communications. And so we did pass through information from the SBU to social media.
Are you also familiar with the fact that President Zelensky has had to clean house at the SBU?
I know there have been a number of personnel changes.
Okay. Well, we'll follow up with this in more detail. The question I have for you is, you're the premier law enforcement operation, and you're a former Department of Justice, high-ranking executive at all levels. So would you agree that the job of the FBI is criminal investigation?
Is criminal investigation and to protect the country from national security threats, those two things.
Okay. So the idea that you take information and you have it taken down, use your authority and the leverage you have to have Meta, Google, Facebook, or Facebook being Meta, or Twitter, take down people's information on things like where COVID came from. Where do you find the national security interest in that? Where do you find the interest in free speech of American citizens being taken down? And I repeat, free speech of American citizens. Where do you have that authority?
So we don't ask social media companies to censor information or suppress information when it comes to national security threats, certainly. So what we do is alert them when some other intelligence agency gives us information about a foreign intelligence service being behind some account. We will call social media companies' attention to that. But at the end of the day, we're very clear that it's up to the social media companies to decide whether to do something about it or not.
The suggestion of the most powerful law enforcement operation is not a suggestion. It is, in fact, effectively an order. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are here today because MAGA Republicans will do anything to protect Donald Trump, their savior, no matter how unfounded or dangerous it may be to do so. Welcome to the legislative arm of the Trump re-election campaign. A grand jury found probable cause that, among other crimes, Trump illegally kept highly sensitive national security documents which could put our country and others and our sources in danger if they got out, and which photographs show Trump kept those records in bathrooms, showers, closets, and in the Mar-a-Lago ballroom. MAGA Republicans are afraid that the justice system might hold Trump accountable for his actions. So to protect him, Republicans are trying to intimidate FBI officials. And in case that does not work, Republicans are trying their hardest to discredit the FBI in the eyes of the American public. When Trump lost in 2020, they tried to make Americans distrust their election systems. And now that the FBI and the Justice Department have sought to hold Trump to the same standard any other American citizen would be held to, MAGA Republicans are telling Americans not to trust the FBI. To protect Trump, Republicans are trying to distract us from the real work that the FBI does every day, which is fighting violent criminals, child predators, and fighting domestic terrorists and extremists so as to protect our democracy and our national security. And even worse, MAGA Republicans are stirring up threats that pose a danger to the safety of FBI employees. It's past time that Republicans realize the consequences of their words and put the good of this country over politics. Now, Director Wray, I want to thank you for your service during a time of unprecedented travail. Director Wray, you were a partner at an international law firm before you took a drastic pay cut to accept the job of FBI director. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's something my wife reminds me of from time to time.
And, but let me ask you this, sir. And you took this office after Trump fired the former FBI director, Jim Comey, correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you contact the Trump administration to offer yourself for this job, or did the administration recruit you for the job?
They contacted me and asked me if I would be willing to consider taking on the role.
So Trump handpicked you to be the FBI director.
Yes.
And he expected you to do what he wanted you to do, correct?
Well, that I can't speak to. I can tell you the same thing I told him,
put it
which
like
is that
this.
I'm going to do this job by the book.
He's unhappy with you now, isn't he?
I'll let him speak for himself.
Well, I think a lot of his acolytes here reflect his intent at this particular time. Director Wray, are you aware that MAGA Republicans have
Wray. Before I get into the primary topic of my remarks, I want to ask you about a separate issue. On June 16th, my esteemed colleague, Ranking Member Raskin of the Oversight Committee, sent you a letter asking the FBI to publicly reiterate certain non-classified information that it provided in an oral briefing about Form FD 1023, subpoenaed by Oversight Chairman Comer. It has now been almost a month since Mr. Raskin sent his letter. When can he expect a response?
I'll have to check with my staff because we've gotten so many letters from so many members, and that's each one of them is important to me. But as I sit here right now, I don't know when the timing is, but we'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
And more importantly, we'll get back to you.
Okay, all right, thank you, and we will follow up. Okay, especially because I did ask directly of your staff, so we'll follow up. And now, St. Louis and I are here today in continuing solidarity with the protesters, the advocates, and movements that are actually targeted by surveillance and other law enforcement abuses in this country. Director Wray, I know that you are aware of the FBI's long and sordid history of targeting Black protesters and activists. At a hearing before this committee in December of 2017, you characterized the abuses related to COINTELPRO as, quote, one of the darker moments in the FBI's history. It's something we're not proud of, but it is also something we've learned from, end quote. But Director Wray, isn't it true that an FBI agent improperly ran a batch query of unminimized FISA information using the identifiers of 133 individuals arrested in connection with the protests after the murder of George Floyd in 2020? Just a yes or no is fine.
Well, I'm aware of the instance you're talking about. Whether or not that correctly describes it or not, I'm not 100% sure. I know it's in the most recent FISC opinion. But what I will tell you is that incident is non-compliance. I consider it unacceptable. And most importantly, it predates all of these fixes and corrective measures and reforms that we've put in place, which I think would have prevented it from happening now.
Thank you. And now on to Zero Fox. Isn't it true a firm hired on a $14 million contract by the FBI, which we've heard already today, to monitor social media threats, previously labeled Black Lives Matter activists as threat actors requiring constant surveillance? Yes or no?
I'm not sure that's a correct description of the way we do work with Zero Fox, but I don't know that that's a correct description of how we do it.
So did the FBI hire the firm?
My understanding of Zero Fox is it has a tool which allows us to in certain instances, engage in social media searches to prevent threats.
So the
But the
so they weren't
specifics
hired.
of the well, I don't know, again, the terms of our arrangement, like whether it's a retention or what, but I've heard the term Zero Fox before. And in my general experience is it's usually used in connection with preventing violence at a particular critical incident of some sort.
So to the tune of $14 million, though, there is reporting that threat actors was actually what they label Black Lives Matter activists, two of whom I know very well. And I served more than 400 days on the ground during the Ferguson uprising myself, more than 400 days, many of those days with those two people that were named and who are not violent. Isn't it true that the FBI has been actively involved in the law enforcement response to people protesting the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, a response that has included state charges of domestic terrorism against protesters? Yes or no?
Well, our Atlanta division is working in support of our state and local partners when it comes to violence and threats of violence that occur amid the unrest that you're referring to.
So the FBI is involved. These are not isolated incidents, and as I said, they're part of a long history of abuses by the FBI against Black and brown communities and progressive movements. These are the real oversight issues. They matter to my district where there is real and justified skepticism of whether the civil rights of Black and brown people are adequately protected. I know this from personal experience in the Ferguson uprising and from other protest movements that I have been a part of. That's why I asked you about the targeting of protesters the last time that you were before us, because it also included me. But what my district is not concerned about is the Republican conspiracy theories and selective targeting of law enforcement agencies who try to hold their twice impeached, twice indicted cult leader Donald Trump accountable. The Insurrection Caucus wants to use this hearing to score immediate political points. They want to invade oversight. They don't want to conduct it. But we're talking about real issues, real reform that could actually save lives. So once again, I urge my Republican colleagues who claim to care about government overreach and weaponization to do the exact same. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I would just remind the lady that what we'd actually like to do is work with you to protect Americans' privacy, whether they've been targeted on the right or on the left.
Point of order. Point of order. Point of order.
Gentleman may state his point of order.
It's not your time.
I appreciate the point of order, and I was just getting ready to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina who will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate that.
I appreciate the reminder.
I want to follow up, Director Wray, about the Foreign Influence Task Force. So there have been exchanges with Mr. Johnson from Louisiana, Ms. Hageman over that, and I understand the difference. I want to respect the differences in characterization. Earlier this week, in denying a stay of its order, the federal court essentially said this isn't complicated. Follow the law as articulated by the United States Supreme Court in the area of the First Amendment. And that was it, as far as it was concerned. The Foreign Influence Task Force is not a predecessor's decision. You set that up, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you've known about the continuous interaction with social media companies. You've known about, I'm sure you know about the testimony of Agent Elvis Chan, correct?
I mean, I don't know everything he's testified to, but I'm aware that he was...
Did you read his testimony?
I've read parts of it, yes.
Okay. And there were thousands of posts that were flagged to the social media companies. These meetings with social media continued across time on a periodic basis. And this court has found, and I understand where the point of disagreement is, I guess, at this stage is, but I believe it's fairly common sense, that if you've got a constant, expectant suggestions from the FBI to social media companies with respect to social media posts, at some point in time, it becomes a government decision or it becomes coercive in nature. That's what the court's preliminarily found. You all, that apparently is the line you decided to walk in setting this up. Today, it's sort of striking that you come in and you sort of casually acknowledge that among other things that we did pass through, I think you said, information from the Ukrainian SBU to social media, as if it's normal for the FBI to serve effectively as the agent of a foreign power, to help pull information out of circulation to which Americans otherwise would have access because the Foreign Intel Service doesn't like it. Now, those are my characterizations. I have tried to be a little bit more neutral in my language, and you can differ with them, but here's what I'm wondering. Why would you walk that fine a line with respect to Americans' fundamental constitutional rights at scale, especially with knowledge of past abuses by the FBI like COINTELPRO? You said earlier that the FBI wasn't even concerned about disinformation per se, but the foreign origins of the information. Assuming so, how does that comport with Lamont versus Postmaster General?
Well, I'm not going to try to engage on Supreme Court jurisprudence, but what I can tell you is that the...
Well, I mean, that's the point, though, Director Wray. And let me just ask you, do you know about that case? Do you know that case?
I've heard of the case.
All right. Right in the heart of the Cold War, at the behest of an American plaintiff, a communist, by the way, Supreme Court said that Americans have a First Amendment right of access to information, even if it is propaganda originating abroad. And in that case, the United States Postal Service could not interdict it. Do you know that, in essence?
Again, I'm not familiar with the holding of the case. I'd have to review it to be sure that that's correct.
That seems to me the trouble. I keep wondering as I read all these revelations how that could be. Or then, let me go to this. You know that the FBI engaged with the social media companies, continuously warning them of hack and leak operations in 2020. Not 2018, by the way, but before the 2020 election. Lots of warnings about hack and leak. You're aware of that?
I'm aware that we gave them lots of information about intelligence that we were receiving from some of our intelligence.
At the time you were giving them those warnings, the FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop for more than 9 months. And, but of course, COINTELPRO itself was the mother of all hack and leak operations. Active leftist activists at the time broke into the FBI's headquarters office in Media, Pennsylvania, stole the files, gave them to the media, and newspapers published them. And you're bound to be aware of New York Times Company versus United States, the Pentagon Papers case.
Yes.
That says that even if information has been stolen or inappropriately taken, that you can't get a prior restraint in almost any circumstance to prevent their being distributed. So how is it that your Foreign Influence Task Force is out warning of hack and leak operations to innocent, not involved in the hack, that would be criminal, but news or social media organizations where information may be circulated?
Well, first off, we're not engaging in any prior restraint. Second,
wow.
Second, well, let me, if I could finish, please. Second, there's no serious dispute that foreign adversaries have and continue to attempt to interfere in our elections, and that they use social media to do it. President Trump himself, in 2018, declared a national emergency to that very effect. And the Senate Intelligence Committee, in a bipartisan, overwhelmingly bipartisan way, by the way, not only found the same thing, but called for more information sharing between us and the social media.
I hear you, but it doesn't justify trampling the established First Amendment rights of Americans as the Supreme Court has declared them. Whether or not, frankly, I agree with them, or you agree with them. And I just don't, that's what I don't get. You come here and the comments are sort of blasé answers. Accountability is always down the road. We never arrives. And I'm not trying, I guess I'm joining the gang up, but what I'm concerned about, and I think Americans are concerned about, is they just never see it. I don't know of an answer other than to take an appropriation from you that's very significant, or to do something to take your intel powers away and put them in another agency. I honestly want to know.
Mr. Chairman.
And I think Americans want to know. I yield.
We sure do. The gentleman from Maryland who keeps us on time is recognized.
Until it's my turn, then I'm going to run over to...
Wait till it gets into this 5 minutes, yeah.
Gentleman's time is about ready to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I appreciate you coming in today. I saw a characterization of this hearing as a GOP-FBI grudge match, but I must say that the only grudge that's been seen here is from the Republican side. I think you've done an outstanding job with your testimony today, even when you've been, admitting that there are shortcomings by your office, that mistakes have been made. I appreciate the fact that you are willing to do that, because it's not easy for agency heads to do that, and also, more importantly, to point out the changes that you've made to try and address those concerns. I want to say this too. There's a couple points that have been made here about, you were just talking about the Foreign Influence Task Force. And I know there's a lot of talk about this as being some kind of prior restraint or First Amendment violation, but I want to say that I'm on the side that thinks this is a very important tool for the FBI and the United States government to have, especially with respect to potential intervention or interference, especially by Russian state actors with respect to American elections. There's some people who think, and I'm kind of starting to agree, that one of the reasons some of my colleagues are pushing so hard against this and other aspects of information protection within the United States is because they want to have Russian interference in the 2024 election.
Oh, please.
I certainly don't. So I certainly thank you for continuing your efforts on that front. There was an issue that was raised about whistleblowers earlier in the hearing, and I wanted to bring this up. I know you can't speak to this, Mr. Director, but these are two checks that were written to some of these witnesses, two of the witnesses that testified here, and they are for over $250,000. Now, they came after they gave their testimony, I think by a few days, but from my perspective, this is something that the American public should know when they evaluate the testimony of these individuals. And hopefully I don't know if the majority knew about this but didn't disclose it at the time or what was going on with it, but in my book, this really brings the credibility of these witnesses' testimony into question. And I think we should keep this in mind when we evaluate the allegations that they've made. I also want to say this too. My Republican colleagues have come a long ways from the law and order days of the Republican Party back when I was a kid. Now we're at defund the FBI. I think one of them selling T-shirts to try and raise money using that slogan. Another colleague is talking about abolish the ATF. Another one wants to say defund the Department of Justice. But as you mentioned in your testimony earlier, the FBI is doing a lot of great work protecting the country from terrorism, foreign intelligence threats, international cartels. There's weapons of mass destruction that you mentioned in your testimony. I appreciate that. And also, there's been a great deal of talk about the domestic terror threats. For me, the planned attempt to kidnap the governor of Michigan and apparently kill her was chilling to the extreme, and I appreciate the fact that you all were able to intervene on that. I want to say this quickly too. I'm running short on time, but the misinformation and weaponization claims that have been made by my Republican colleagues, I want to offer these two articles. One is called by Aaron Blake of the Washington Post, "All the Ways Trump, Not His Foes, Sought to Weaponize the Government." And then another one, this is Philip Bump. This is on the Missouri v. Biden case, which was quoted extensively at the beginning of the hearing, a deeply ironic reinforcement of right-wing information. The point of this article is that the Missouri v. Biden decision, which, and I know you can't comment on it because it's pending litigation, but I also think it's being challenged by the Department of Justice, and rightly so, because it's riddled with factual inaccuracies and legal inaccuracies as well. One other article for the record, this is by Lee Littman and Lawrence Tribe. Restricting the government for speaking to tech will spread disinformation and harm democracy. I'd like all of those admitted. And then lastly, with respect to the Hunter Biden issue, there's a letter from Abby Lowell, who represents Mr. Biden. This is to Representative Jason Smith, but I think also to Chairman Jordan as well, that raises the pushback on the allegations. That points out that the investigation began during the Republican Trump administration, was supervised by 2 Republican attorneys general, was carried over by a holdover Republican U.S. attorney. Last point I want to make, I promise I won't run over my time much. I happen to represent the district where we contain 2 of the sites where the FBI headquarters could be moved to. The chairman made a reference to maybe not wanting to fund the move, but I must say, I think I had an office near your building. They've got nets around it to keep parts of the building from falling down and hurting pedestrians. The move is important and also would give you a chance to consolidate. Hopefully you'll bring it to Prince George's County. We'll save $1 billion for the taxpayers. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, FBI's mission is to protect the American people and uphold the U.S. Constitution, correct?
Yes.
So we had a couple years ago, it was a hearing, and I actually, looking on all of the concerns that I've seen was really warrantless surveillance and abuses of Section 702 of FISA. I compare your agency to KGB, and spending 2 years in this community, reading a lot of reports now, doing a lot of hearings, I am really shocked that your agency is involved not just unlawful surveillance of American citizens, intimidation of American citizens, censorship of American citizens, potential cover-ups of convenient political figures, and potential setups of inconvenient political figures. And a lot of my colleagues asked a lot of questions, but I think when we look at that, and unfortunately we haven't been doing our job authorizing spending, which was not authorized by our committee already for over a decade, we're going to have this serious conversation and including reauthorization of Section 702. But I want to talk about, follow up on some other issues that you mentioned about that my colleagues was talking about, and you mentioned that you focus on malign foreign actors. So in Durham report, which describes 2020, he states, and this is a quote, "Steele subsources could have been compromised by the Russians. FBI never gave appropriate consideration to the possibility that the Steele reports was Russian disinformation. No vetting happened. You have some falsified FISA court application. You have some very shady, confidential human sources that you kept paying for them. Nothing was vetted. Some of your head of counterintelligence division was accused of taking money from Russian oligarchs just recently this year. So you said all was bad. Now we go to 2022. Your agency is involved with SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, to actually provide information to big tech to censor just views of American people. No vetting seems as happening. This is information, actually a lot of this information was pro-Russian against Ukraine and pro-Putin. Your agents just pass it along. It seems like nothing happened. And it's interesting for me that, when I raised some issue, actually beginning of July, and what's happening in Ukraine, I don't have any confidential human sources, just using common sense and intelligence that something is wrong happening in Ukraine. It seems like there is a lot of infiltration. I was attacked. Oh my gosh, how can you question? Well, strangely enough, after me raising this question in the middle of July, President Zelensky fired his SBU top guy, opens over 600 investigations, is potential, infiltration by Russians, and then fire a lot of other people for corruption, and anti-corruption prosecutor was suddenly installed. But what is really interesting for me, how could you have these processes, and are you doing actually any investigation to look? Because it seems to me, as I understand, you still have our agencies working with SBU, with, coming from KGB time and FSB time has a lot of potential to have this infiltration. Are you doing any investigations on these issues?
Doing investigations on...
Yeah, to look at that, why we're doing unvetted information we're taking from SBU, which actually was infiltrated and given to censor Americans to our big tech companies. Are you looking into that as an agency?
I'm not sure there's an investigation that is directly on point to what you're saying. I mean, certainly the SBU is an agency that we
So we're not doing
worked with for a long time.
So did we change the processes now, since we know your guys work with SBU, SBU was infiltrated by Russian, and big tech was censoring American citizens with this unvetted information that actually was provided by Russians. Do you change any processes? Or is it still happening? You have still the same processes that happen. Is it still happening now?
Well, the engagement that we had with SBU was during the...
But I'm talking right now.
Yeah.
Because recently, some of your agents had actually a joint meeting, and they were bragging how they're top cooperations with SBU. Did you change processes?
I'm not sure what processes you're talking
To
about.
vet information.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Again, during the period at the beginning of the invasion...
No, I'm talking right now.
Yeah.
Do you vet information that you get from agencies like SBU? I mean, I don't know if we're trying to, are we being stupid? I understand. Are we being infiltrated by Russians or corrupt? I don't understand why we're not vetting information with such a really challenging agency. So are you changing anything of that? I would like to have a briefing or something on this, because if you're not looking at that, I have a huge problem with that.
I'm happy to try to see if we can arrange to get you a better briefing on the subject.
Because this is a serious national security issue. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina. Oh, unanimous, I'm sorry. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. The lone ranger on this side.
Thanks for sticking with us.
We appreciate you for a moment, and all my members. Let me just quickly indicate that I have a document that is a tweet that is wanting to submit into the record. 2 of the Republican witnesses were gifted 255,000 checks, 255,000 in checks immediately after they testified before this committee. It seems to be quid pro quo, but the fact of the tweet that I'm submitting from Mr. Kyle Serapin says the fact that Mr. Allen has not yet cashed the check is not that he did not receive the check. So I submit in the record the tweet from Mr. Serapin, who indicated that 2 gentlemen, Garrett and Marcus, were receiving a check of
Continuing your attack on whistleblowers without objection. Those are
just a clarification, Mr. Chairman, and then finally, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Homeland Security, Strategic Intelligence Assessment and Data on Domestic Terrorism, dated October 2022, Appendix A, the document itself, Appendix A, Appendix B, and the categories of domestic violent extremism.
Without objection.
Your kindness is appreciated. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few weeks ago, Special Counsel Durham confirmed the FBI had bias against President Trump and took unprecedented steps to go after him during the 2016 presidential election. The Durham report showed, 1, the FBI did not have an adequate basis to launch the investigation. 2, it didn't verify or examine all of the evidence. And 3, the FBI was politically charged against then-candidate Trump. This, of course, was before your time. But here we go again. In August of 22, the FBI raided the personal residence of President Trump. This unprecedented raid was a shocking escalation in what we talk about with the weaponization of the federal government against political opponents. You know, our country is almost 250 years old. We've had 46 presidents. This is unprecedented. When we say it's unprecedented, we mean it. This has never been seen before in our country's history. Just like we saw in the Durham report, the FBI did not follow traditional protocols, and this investigation was chock full of abnormalities. So I kind of want to go into those a little bit. Director Wray, as you know, the committee recently conducted a transcribed interview with Stephen D'Antuono, the former assistant director in charge of the FBI's Washington field office. He has over 20 years of FBI experience, and he expressed some strong concerns with your department's handling of the case, the DOJ's handling of the case. The first abnormality deals with the FBI office that they conducted the raid themselves. Director Wray, generally speaking, which FBI office oversees Palm Beach, Florida?
The Miami office has an office in Palm Beach, but to the question you're asking, it's not unusual for a field office that is investigating the case to send the case team down to be involved in conducting a search.
And President Trump's residence is in Palm Beach, Florida, is that correct?
Yes.
Director Wray, did the Miami field office conduct the investigation and search at Mar-a-Lago?
The Washington field office conducted the search, although I think there was some assistance by people from the Miami office.
But it was primarily run out of Washington and not the Miami field office.
Which was the case team that had opened the investigation.
Did the FBI
based on a referral from the National Archives, which is in D.C.
Did the FBI headquarters in Washington instruct the Washington field office to start that investigation and that raid at Mar-a-Lago?
Well, the investigation was opened in the field by the Washington field office.
Right. So it was not Miami, it was Washington.
And the Washington field office opened the investigation based on a referral from the National Archives, which is also in D.C. So that makes sense.
Who made the decision to have the Washington field office execute that search warrant rather than the Miami field office?
That I can't speak to the specific individual. As you know, this is an ongoing case, and internal deliberations about
I'm not asking about the facts of the case. I'm asking about who made the call to go to Washington and use the Washington field office as opposed to Miami? Would that have been you?
Well, no, the Washington field office opened the investigation because they're the office where the National Archives is, which is what referred the investigation and kicked off the whole investigation.
Director, on May 15th, 2023, the the FBI, your special counsel, or excuse me, not your special counsel, your general counsel sent a letter to Special Counsel Durham in response to his report. In that letter, the FBI wrote, quote, "FBI executive management has instructed investigations to be run out of the field and not from headquarters. So despite the location of the search occurring in the territory of the FBI's field office, the Washington field office instructed the raid." This is inconsistent with the FBI statement from 2 months ago. I want to move on to a second
Sir, I'm
abnormality
sorry,
real
it's
quick.
actually not
I've got
it's
1
not
minute left.
inconsistent.
Well, I got 1 minute left, Director. Now, is it normal for a U.S. attorney to be assigned to an investigation, a high-profile investigation?
Well, that's a decision that's made over at the Justice Department as to how they allocate
But that's normal
responsibility.
protocol, is that correct?
I mean, there are investigations, prosecutions and cases that are handled by Main Justice. There are trial attorneys there, but again, I only speak to the FBI's decision-making, not to the Justice Department.
And a U.S. attorney was not initially assigned to this investigation, were they?
I think that's correct, but again, I would refer you to the Justice Department for any questions about U.S. attorneys versus Main Justice.
And the third abnormality that I find really troubling, probably the most troubling, quite frankly, is the FBI did not first seek consent to search the residence, did they?
Well, there is a very detailed filing in court that goes through in fairly excruciating detail the process that was followed that led up to the execution of the search. And it goes through in great detail the efforts that were made to secure documents. Because this case is now pending and moving forward in federal court, I want to respect that and not engage in more discussion beyond. But other than refer you to the filing, which lays out in great detail, I think, the answers to your questions.
Director, that the Durham report laid out very clearly that in cases, just in general, that you cross every T and dot every I. That was not done here. You didn't run it out of the field office. You didn't have a U.S. attorney assigned to the case. Senior officials did not listen to people on the ground, as the testimony of Mr. Dan Tuono talked about. You didn't ask for consent from their attorney. You didn't ask for a consent search, despite the president having cooperated and handed over documents for a long period of time. And you refused to wait for President Trump's own attorney to get to Mar-a-Lago to do this with you. And so what has changed since Durham? You've acknowledged this in 2023 that things should be run out of the field, that you've made internal process changes, but nothing has really changed since 2016, and that's my big concern. With that, I yield back.
I could not disagree more, but we'll just have to disagree on that one.
Well, here's what he said. This is questions from the Democrat lawyer in the depositions to Mr. D'Antuono. Can you explain to the attendees here why the case was not assigned to, for example, the Miami field office? And Mr. D'Antuono's answer was, I have absolutely no idea. And then they said the investigation was handled differently. And he said, his answer was, it was handled differently than I would have expected to be than any other case is handled. So I think that was the member's point, and that's the concern that we have, in spite of the letter we got from your general counsel. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes, and then we'll go to Wisconsin.
A recent poll found that 37% of Americans have a positive view of the FBI. And that's from an NBC poll. I wouldn't exactly call that right media propaganda, and I think I know why. Here's what the American people know and believe about the FBI today, sir. If you are a Trump, you'll be prosecuted. If you are a Biden, you'll be protected. And the American people that I represent are sick and tired of this double standard. It seems like every single hearing that we have in this room, we talk about the two-tiered justice system of Biden's DOJ and the FBI, and as we were talking earlier, here we are again. President Trump endured an unprecedented raid at his home in Mar-a-Lago. President Biden's home, however, was respectfully browsed. President Trump is facing up to 400 years in federal prison for allegedly being in possession of classified documents he obtained as the commander-in-chief of these United States of America. And meanwhile, President Biden is facing no charges for the classified documents he had held at his time as a senator and a vice president, not the president of these United States of America. And last I checked, he had no legal authority to declassify those documents. Assuming President Trump was in possession of said classified documents, would those documents be more secure, surrounded by Secret Service at Mar-a-Lago, or in a box, in a garage, behind your Corvette? You know the answer to that question. Question for you, sir. What can you tell us about the status of the FBI's investigation of President Biden's classified documents found next to his Corvette in Delaware and those found at the Penn Biden Center? Do we have an update on that, sir?
What I can tell you is that there is an ongoing special counsel investigation led by Mr. Robert Hur, and we have FBI agents affiliated with it, working on it, working very actively and aggressively with him on that case. I obviously disagree with your description of the two standards. In my view, at least under my watch, we have one standard.
Okay.
And that is we're going to pursue the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it. And I add that last part because especially in sensitive investigations, almost by definition, somebody's not going to like it.
So I understand, and that's actually why I led with the sentiment of the American people. I understand that's your sentiment. I do want to finish this. So I want everybody to talk about this dichotomy that we have seen. I get your point, sir, but that's just not what we see as the public, as we the people. We see one case being fast-tracked and one case being slow-walked. We see one president's home being raided, the other president's home being kindly searched. You have one government agency, the Secret Service, protecting the former president and his home, and another government agency, the FBI, raiding the same home. Now, to me, sir, that's tragically ironic. And we expect more from a functional constitutional republic, and these things shouldn't be happening. Now, it's my opinion that Joe Biden is the most unpopular president we have seen in a century, and that's why he knows the only way to stop President Trump from beating him in November is by putting him in jail. You talked about this, Mr. Fry. In the 247 years of this existence of this great nation, only one president has ever been indicted by the DOJ and has home raided by the FBI. Now, some have said that President Trump's indictment means that no one is above the law. Okay, all right, I would love to see that. But what about Hillary Clinton? And what about Joe Biden? And what about Hunter Biden, who is America's favorite son? And let me tell you something, I got a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old daughter at my house. Hunter Biden to me is like glitter. He is on everything and you cannot get rid of him. And yet nothing is going to be done about this. We're sick of it. James Comey decided not to prosecute Hillary Clinton despite overwhelming evidence that she committed crimes. And as I recall, it was the position of the FBI to not prosecute because they didn't want to interfere with the presidential election. What do you call this? The Iowa caucuses are in 6 months. 6 months. I think the American public would expect to see this from Cuba and from Venezuela and from Russia and from China, but not here. The people expect us to have blind justice. They expect equal justice under the law. It is not the job of the DOJ or the FBI to prosecute Joe Biden's top political opponent who is leading in every single primary poll, and the Iowa caucuses are in 6 months. Let the people decide. It's our job to uphold the Constitution. As a West Point grad and military veteran, this is the Constitution I give my life to protect, and I expect us all to uphold it likewise. Thank you so much for being here.
Mr. Chairman, may I briefly respond?
Sure.
So number one, as to the investigations related to Mrs. Clinton, as you noted, that happened under my predecessor, and I'm not going to attempt to speak for or defend that decision.
I recognize that.
Second, as to your descriptions of the investigations related to Hunter Biden, as you know, there is an ongoing investigation being led by the Delaware U.S. Attorney appointed by President Trump, and we are actively working on that investigation with him.
Well, we look forward to seeing the results of this quickly and swiftly.
And third and finally, to your point about the American people and their views, I worry less about NBC polls or polls by any other news outlet, but I will tell you that the number of people in Texas applying to work for us since I've been in this job has gone up 93%, and in fact,
I'm not going to quote Matt Gaetz. I heard his response to this earlier.
In fact, we have more applicants from the state of Texas annually in the last several years than any other state in the country.
And that makes sense because Texas is the greatest state in the country.
Then I think that speaks very well of the view of Texans about the FBI.
Director, any agents who served on the Crossfire Hurricane investigation or the Mueller investigation, are any of those agents on Mr. Hur or Mr. Smith's special counsel team?
I don't believe so, but I can't, on the top of my head, go through the list of, there's a lot of agents involved in the 2 investigations, and so let me check into that and see if there's any way we can get back to you on that, because I don't want to get out over my skis.
Thank you. Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Director Wray, thanks for being here today. On June 21st, the committee heard testimony from Special Counsel John Durham. Have you reviewed his findings, and did you dispute any of those?
I have reviewed them. There's a big multi-100-page binder of it sitting right to my right on my desk, and I refer to it frequently. I can't say that I'm aware of anything specific that I would dispute in it. Certainly, as you may know, not only did we fully cooperate with him in the investigation, as he noted in his report, but I actually assigned a bunch of agents and FBI personnel to work on it with him to help him. And I'm very proud of the fact that the reforms that we've put in place in response to the Inspector General's investigation, also in the Crossfire Hurricane, as well as some other changes that we made working closely with Attorney General Barr, if those reforms had been in place back at the time that all of this stuff that Special Counsel Durham found, I don't think any of this would have happened.
So the confirmation bias, which was brought up time and time again when Durham was here before the committee, you feel those have been addressed? I think Jason Jones says he put together a letter, and that includes a lot of that information. Do you feel it's adequate, or?
Well, I'm ambitious by nature for us as an organization, so we're constantly looking for more things we can do. But I'll give you an example on this issue of bias, because I think it's so important. One of the things that I did as FBI director, and I did this a couple of years ago, was in order, and this frankly, it was in reaction in many ways more to both the Hillary Clinton investigation as well as the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, was that I put in place training for the entire workforce that focused specifically not just on the importance of avoiding bias, but the importance of avoiding even the appearance of bias. And one of the things that I did to make sure that I was sending that message was that rather than like the way it normally happens in a bureaucracy where all the training gets saddled on all the folks on the front lines right out of the gates, I started with the top 200, 300 or so people in the organization, brought them all to Quantico for an entire day, stand down. We heard from the federal judiciary, the Inspector General, the Hatch Act Office of Special Counsel, and the whole point of it was the importance of not just objectivity, but making sure that we are faithful to the appearance of objectivity as well. And then we had a smaller version of that went out to the whole workforce. But the idea was to send the message that everybody at the top has to take the medicine first.
So there's two other things that were in there. Serious lack of analytical rigor was one of the other things that Durham brought up numerous times. And then I'll just, there was a noticeable departure from how the FBI approached matters involving possible attempted foreign election interference plans amid, as you just brought up, at the Clinton campaign. So the question would be, has the FBI protocols surrounding investigations, I want to know specifically in the presidential campaigns, what's the policy now? We're on the verge of another nationwide election, and I'm wondering, is there anything specific in writing that you could inform the committee of this afternoon?
Well, we put in place a whole slew of reforms that help to try to mitigate against the kind of concerns you're raising. Whether there's a specific one that I would think is I don't think there's any one that's a single silver bullet. I know that Attorney General Barr and I put in place certain reforms that dealt with particularly sensitive investigations and approvals that would have to be required before anything like that could happen. I know that was very important to him, and we worked together on that. But we have a whole slew of additional approvals, sign-offs, triple checks, safeguards, et cetera, that go into a lot of these kinds of issues. When you raise the issue of analytical rigor, obviously I talk about rigor. I bet my folks would tell you they hear the word rigor coming out of my mouth probably every single day. And that is something that we're always aspiring to get better at.
So if you had somebody within the FBI that you found out was involved in trying to manipulate or rig an election, especially at the national level, I mean, how would that be handled by the FBI? How would you handle it as a director?
Well, Obviously it would depend on the specific facts as to exactly what it is the person was doing, but accepting your premise, that's the kind of thing that would have the person referred to our disciplinary process.
To be fired or terminated?
And the process would play itself out. I mean, we have a whole offense code that goes into, what different rules we have and different punishments, and there's a whole complicated system that goes into the disciplinary process. Our disciplinary process is, for the most part, I think one of the better ones in federal law enforcement, but there is a process that we have to follow.
Has anybody that was involved in that type of action in the past been disciplined for that at the FBI?
Well, let me answer that this way. Obviously, former employees, the important point here is that all the senior managers in any way involved in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation are all gone from the FBI for a variety of reasons in a variety of ways. To the extent that there's anybody left, you're talking about a small handful of currently line-level employees, all of whom have been referred to this disciplinary process. That process, as you may have heard me say in response to an earlier exchange, as is typical, working with Special Counsel Durham, we had to put that kind of on hold until he could finish his case, because the criminal case had to come first. And that process is now fully underway. But again, you're talking about a few relatively line-level people where we erred on the side of inclusion. So anybody who touched it, we sent them to the process, and we'll see where that plays itself out. But the key point is that all the main players, if you will, the senior people, are all gone. I put in place an entirely new leadership team.
Very good. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director, for your patience. So you're very, very good at your job, and as illustrated by the last 4 hours. And I just want to say that you're way better at defending than you are at explaining what you're going to do about the problems that have led to your dismal public profile. And I wish it was better, but I have the most recent poll here from, I think it's from Harris. Yes, it is, the Harvard CAPS Harris poll. 70% of respondents said that they were either very or somewhat concerned about interference by the FBI and other intelligence agencies in elections. 71% agreed that changes post-2016 had not done enough to prevent further interference, and that wide-ranging reform still required. Now, I also, pretty interesting article in the Inquirer, the damning Durham report, and I'll just read from you this quote from Mr. Durham. The promulgation of additional rules and regulations to be learned in yet more training sessions would likely prove to be a fruitless exercise. So, you must have done something more than promulgating additional rules and regulations, because to me, that doesn't do much at all when we're going to an issue that probably is cultural. And to that end, I just want to share with you some of the things I hear from my sheriffs across my 20 counties. So I have 20 county sheriffs. In fact, one of my brothers used to be one for 15 years. And so I called him, my brother, and I said, hey, what was your experience with the FBI? And he said, they're very qualified. But when they appear, you know you have to be aware that part of their job is to enforce Section 1983. And he pointed that out just because there's a constant tension between FBI and local law enforcement. Would you agree? And by the way, when you go out and you talk to sheriffs, nobody's going to say to the director of the FBI, we don't like you. Why would they do such a crazy thing? They want your help. And by the way, I asked for your help down in Southern Oregon against all the drug cartels. And to your credit, and your office out of Portland's credit, you did your best to help. You don't have very many people there, but you did your best to help. But for you to come in here and say, I've never heard from a sheriff that we're doing a bad job. Well, no, you haven't. But now tell me, am I wrong? Am I saying that sheriffs would walk right up to you and say, you know, you're doing a bad job? I mean, how many have said that to you?
Well, my experience with sheriffs actually has been that they are often very colorful and very blunt in their communications.
But you didn't mention.
So I feel that they.
But let me, forgive me for interrupting. But earlier today, you didn't say anything about them being negative. And what I'm trying to get at here is, you've done your job today to defend your agency, and good for you. But it's not what we're here today. I want to go to Durham's page 288 of his report. And this is going to the heart, I think, of what your problem, part of your problem may be. And he's making his observations. He's very careful to protect you. He says, in making observations, we're mindful of the benefit of hindsight. And then he says this, some FBI employees who were interviewed by our investigators advised they had significant reservations about aspects of Crossfire Hurricane and tried to convey their misgivings. Others had doubts about the investigation, did not voice their concerns. In some cases, nothing was said because of a sense there had to be more compelling information in possession of those closest to the, and still other and current firm employees who maintained they did their best to take reasonable investigative steps and acted within your procedure and guideline. Here's what I'm getting at here is, I don't think people within your organization are comfortable calling out negative things. I don't think they are. And I wouldn't be either. I'd be worried because I look at what happens to whistleblowers and others. I'd go, oh man, this is not a safe place to be. I'm gonna keep my mouth shut. And I think that is not a good thing for your agency. But you know where it starts? It starts with actually admitting that you got a problem. And I don't think you're very good at that either. I'm going to your testimony, page 13. You might want to look at it. I'm sure you wrote it, so you probably don't have to. But on page 13, last paragraph, you write, to be sure, nobody more deeply shares members' concerns regarding past FBI, and here's the words, compliance violations. Compliance, is that all they did? Aren't there a whole bunch of better terms? I went to ChatGPT to find out. I found these words that might have been better. But I'm really asking you, is that all they did? Didn't they break a law? Didn't they do something more than fail to comply? I'm asking you, if the culture is the issue, doesn't the leader have to at least call out bad acts a little more aggressively? That's my question.
Number one, depending on what the violation is, that may or may not be the right description. Some of the things that have happened in the past are things that I have deplored in the strongest possible terms. Some of the things that have happened in the past, I think, are described as compliance violations. So there's no one description that fits everything that has gone wrong at the FBI over the last 5 or 10 years. My language, in general, tends to be fairly measured. I think that's a fair statement about me. Some people refer to me as low-key, but no one should ever mistake my demeanor for what my spine is made out of. And I have made it very clear to our people over and over and over again that I expect them to do their work in the right way with rigor and objectivity. And as to FBI employees' willingness to speak freely and to complain, much like our exchange about sheriffs, I will tell you, your description of our employees doesn't fit with my experience. When I get out to all 56 field offices, one of the things that I do, especially on this last round, my second round, was to meet with employees without their executive management present, just me and them, including people who are retirement eligible. And we have a term, an affectionate slang term for people who are retirement eligible. It's called KMA. You can guess what KMA stands for, and it reflects their ability, because they're retirement eligible, to be able to speak freely. And they complain to me about all kinds of things, and we have a very lively conversation. So I'm quite confident that my employees feel comfortable talking to me about problems and things that we need to fix. But my demeanor is part of what you're reacting to.
Yeah, forgive me for interrupting, but my time is over. I want to thank you for your candor, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Wray, thank you for being here. You know, believe it or not, I'm basically just a simple country dentist, but I do know my dentistry. And one thing I know about are abscesses. If you have an abscess, you can have a mild or moderate one, and you treat it with antibiotics and warm salt rinses, and in a week to 10 days, it'll be better. If you have a severe one, you've got to take a scalpel to that abscess. You've got to cut it open, and you've got to let the pus and the blood and the gas drain out. If you don't, that abscess will travel. It'll travel to the patient's brain, possibly, or to their heart, and it definitely can kill them. That's the type of infection that I feel is within the FBI today. It has gotten so deep that we need to get in there with a metaphorical scalpel before it kills our nation. We need real structural change, and this committee is that metaphorical scalpel. A clear sign of the rot is a memo where your agents, and I know you say you feel bad about this too, but nevertheless, and I don't think you like to talk about it, but your agents in a field office attempted to spy on Catholic churches and their congregations and frame them as extremists. This is unbelievable. How do we get there? Who exactly are the Catholics you're going to go after here, or they were going to go after? The charitable men of the Knights of Columbus that help their communities, that help charities, that help people in every way they can? Or maybe we meant the folks that are fighting for the sanctity of life? Or are you talking about those who hold true to their beliefs rooted in the traditional values and teachings of the Catholic faith? As a Roman Catholic myself, and I believe you are as well, I was deeply, deeply disturbed by this memo. And it's shameful it was only rescinded after basically it got leaked to the public. That should scare each and every American, from parents at school board meetings to grandmas clutching their rosary beads. The misguided priorities of our intelligence community put every American at risk, and it is wrong. It is un-American, and it undermines two of our most important tenets: freedom of speech and freedom of religion. It's what our nation is built upon. Director Wray, you work for the American people. They pay your salary. They pay all of our salaries. They don't work for us. You work for them. You're supposed to protect them from the bad guys. And now many feel that they need protection from the FBI. I have a few questions here. Despite multiple requests, why hasn't the FBI produced an unredacted copy of this memo that really outlines this? It isn't public security, it isn't national security, it isn't public safety. This is an internal thing that you all did that was wrong, and we as a committee, this committee, have the right to look at it. When are we gonna get it? Why haven't we gotten it already? Unredacted.
We redact information for a variety of reasons that cover various rules that apply to us.
So I want to know why
Our
this one.
ability to-
I don't know about the rules. All I know, I told you, man, I'm not a lawyer, all right? But you know what I want to know? I want to know why we don't know what happened here, that people in their churches had to worry, and it isn't something that's going to affect national security. So whatever damn rule it is you have, we should change that rule. Because when something like this happens, and it isn't a matter of national security, then we should know. So I'd like to know when we're going to get it. I'd like a date certain.
What I can tell you is that we are almost done with our internal review, and as I said to the chairman, we're going to be providing a briefing to the committee on what the internal review found.
When?
It should be later this summer.
And why do we need your internal review? Good you're doing an internal review. You should do a lot internally. But why don't we get the information when we ask for it, when we subpoena for it? We clearly are not creating any risk to our nation or national security. You could give us that tomorrow. Why don't we get that part tomorrow, and then you can give us the briefing and the internal review?
As I said, we're going to give you a briefing on the internal review, and then we can discuss additional information that may.
Because you're going to try to shape it differently and make it out that it was kind of okay.
On that, no. I will tell you that I am not going to defend or excuse that memo or that product.
I understand you said that. I have simple yes or no. These are real easy questions. Has the FBI created or maintained any list of Roman Catholic churches? Yes or no?
Any list of Roman Catholic
churches? Correct.
Well, we're certainly not targeting any Roman Catholic churches.
Well, they were. They were. The field office was until we found out. But do you, as a yes or no, do you have a list? If you don't have a list, it's easy to say no.
Well, we have 38,000 employees. We engage with churches of all kinds.
So you may have a list of churches that you're looking at for possible
No, not for possible investigation.
How about Russian Orthodox churches?
Same answer.
Greek Orthodox churches? Tell me, yes or no? Evangelical churches? Tell me yes or no.
We do not maintain
yes or no.
Excuse me?
Please answer yes or no.
It's not a yes or no question.
It is a yes or no. If you've got a list of churches that you're targeting and looking at, the answer is yes. If you don't, the answer is no.
If your question is, do we have a list of churches that we are targeting, then the answer is no, we do not have.
How about Jewish synagogues? Yes or no? Same question.
We do not maintain any kind of list of religious institutions that we're targeting because we are not targeting religious institutions.
Let me tell you, it's a sorry state of affairs that these questions are questions I have to ask, and it's a damn shame to see what's become of our once universally respected FBI. We need structural change, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Director, the 5 individuals who signed off on that memo, have any of them lost their security clearance during this internal investigation?
I don't believe anybody has lost a security clearance, but again, we have an internal review pending, and that I'll let that come to its conclusion.
How did you become aware of the Catholic memo that the gentleman just referenced?
How did I become aware of it?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman may state his point of order.
Whose time is the chairman consuming with
I thought for the committee, it's not a point of order. The chair now recognizes the gentleman for Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I will say this, Mr. Wray, I'm one of those sheriffs that will be very blunt with you today. That's right here. I've had an opportunity to look at your testimony, lots of stuff, and hear about numerous task forces, crimes being committed against children, including even infants and toddlers, MS-13 gang members coming across the open southern border, the poisoning and killing of the American people with fentanyl, the sex trafficking, the human trafficking. It's quite clear, it is clear that you guys are dealing with some of the sickest bastards in our society. I have an article here from CNN in January 2022 calling the January 6th investigation the biggest investigation in FBI history. And what shocks me about this, quite honestly, is that you don't mention January 6th. Again, the biggest investigation, not one time in your 14-page testimony. You don't mention it one time. And that makes me ask myself the question, what the hell are you hiding? Sir, you mentioned 38,000 agents and support personnel in your agency. How many FBI agents and support personnel have you assigned to the January 6th investigation?
I don't know that I know the number. I know we have a lot of people working on it in multiple field
Fair
offices.
enough, lots.
Yeah.
Knowing that you are dealing with some of the sickest people in our society with investigations related to child sex trafficking, have you reassigned any of these agents or personnel to investigate January 6th? Yes or no?
I don't believe we have reassigned people away from child exploitation to January 6th.
Now, let me just say this, Director. I find that answer
knowledge.
disturbing because last month, Steve Friend, he testified before the Weaponization Committee. Mr. Friend was a domestic terrorism investigator for you, and he was told by one of his superiors that January 6th was, I quote, a higher priority than pursuing child pornography cases, end quote. And for those of you watching in America, understand today's FBI is more concerned about searching for and arresting Grandma and Grandpa for entering the Capitol building that day than pursuing the sick individuals in our society who prey on our children. And Mr. Wray, your priorities are flawed. But let's rehash what we know so far, all right? It's the largest investigation in FBI history, and you don't mention it in your testimony. Agents have been reassigned from child exploitation cases and so on. So now let's get into the money, Mr. Wray. How much taxpayer money has been spent on January 6th?
I don't know that I have the figure
You don't have
in
it?
my
Okay,
head,
fine.
but
Mr. Wray, I got an article here, December 22, 2022, 2 years after the events of January 6th, and it says the Justice Department has requested another $34 million from Congress. And number one, you shouldn't get another dime. The FBI shouldn't get another dime for this political witch hunt against the greatest president in my lifetime, Donald J. Trump. I want to turn my attention now to this fella, this character, Mr. Ray Epps. We've all heard of him. We've heard of Mr. Ray Epps. He was number 16 on your FBI most wanted list. He was encouraging people the night prior and the day of to go into the Capitol. And Mr. Ray Epps can be seen at the first breach of Capitol grounds at approximately 12:50 p.m. Play the clip, please.
We need to go into the Capitol.
Into the Capitol.
Into the Capitol. What? We are going to the Capitol, where our problems are. It's that direction. Please spread the word.
All right, okay, but one more thing.
Yeah, so can we go up there? No?
When we go in,
Are we going to get arrested if we
leave
go
this
up there?
here. Yeah, you don't need to get
Just
shot.
arrest us.
breaching the line, going in at the first breach into the Capitol grounds, the restricted area. Mr. Wray, you have arrested hundreds of people related to January 6th. And there have been people arrested for breaching Capitol grounds. Cooey Griffin is an example. Rachel Genko is an example. And then we go to Mr. Brandon Strecka. Brandon was arrested for disorderly and disruptive conduct, which included yelling, I quote, "Go, go, go," as rioters tried to empty the Capitol. These three never went into the Capitol. They never assaulted anyone. So let's be honest with each other. There is very little difference between the actions of Wray Epps and Brandon Strecka that day, but yet Strecka was arrested and Epps wasn't. Epps also testified to the January 6th committee. He was back at his hotel when video evidence showed that he wasn't. He lied. He was on the Capitol grounds just as Brandon Strecka was. Epps even texted his nephew at 2:12 p.m. and said, I quote, "I was in the front with a few others." It was on the video. "I also orchestrated it." Now look into the camera, sir, when you answer my next question. Are you going to arrest Mr. Epps, yes or no?
I'm not going to engage here in a discussion about individual people who are or are not going to be prosecuted.
Can I get a commitment? You just watched the video. I'm an old law dog. I understand a little bit about probable cause. He did very little. There was very little difference what he did and Mr. Strecka. You can see him. He's encouraging, I almost think he's inciting a riot. He's encouraging people the night prior to go into the Capitol, the day of, go into the Capitol, and he was at the first breach, and he breached the restricted area. Everybody, a lot of people getting arrested for not going into the Capitol, but they're in the restricted area, but yet, Wray Epps, who many people feel, fed, right? And there's a lot of clout over this. So my point is this. You arrested a lot of folks for unlawful activity. You just saw the video. And I will tell you, Mr. Wray, if you don't arrest Mr. Epps, there's a reason behind it. I believe you know what it is. And it appears to me you are protecting this guy. I strongly recommend you get your house back in order. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I might briefly.
Gentlemen, will respond, then we got a couple point of orders.
It is
Not
never,
unanimous consent, excuse me. Go ahead.
it has never been appropriate for an FBI director in congressional testimony to be weighing in on who is or isn't going to be arrested and who is or isn't going to get charged, which is a prosecutor's decision. If you are suggesting that the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources or FBI agents, the answer is no, it was not. And to suggest otherwise is a disservice to our hardworking, dedicated law enforcement professionals.
Can I respond to that now that the point is, he was number 16 on your list.
Yeah,
he was 16 on your list. You never arrested him. But hundreds of Americans were arrested. Shame on you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida for unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent for all members have 5 legislative days to submit any additional materials as well as any questions for the record for the director. And I would hope that those questions for the record we would submit would receive more timely responses than some of our letters have. I would further seek unanimous consent that the WhatsApp message from Hunter Biden I used earlier in the hearing be submitted for the record.
Well, without objection, the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a unanimous consent request that a article from the Daily Mail dated today with the headline, January 6th protester Wray Epps reveals he's forced to live in an RV in hiding after death threats over FBI informant conspiracy. Feds confirm he's never worked for them as he slams right-wing theorists using him as a scapegoat. I'd like to offer this into the record.
Without objection, chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, thank you for your time today. You said earlier in response to Representative Iss's questions that the job of the FBI is to, 1, undertake criminal investigations, and 2, protect the U.S. from national security threats. Would you agree with me that in doing those activities, the FBI has to do a lot of that in what are effectively confidential conditions? Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you're undertaking those activities in those confidential conditions, you're going to require tools that have been appropriated by Congress in the past, tools that say to you, we're going to trust you to use those tools correctly, and in return, the FBI then is expected to not abuse the trust of those tools that are provided to the FBI to undertake its activities. Is that a correct statement as well?
Yes, I would agree with that.
So trust is a very important thing, both the giving of trust when you get those tools, and then making sure that you do not abuse those that trust once those tools have been given to you. Were you aware that according to a recent poll by Harvard Caps Harris, 70% of respondents in the United States said that they were either very or somewhat concerned about interference by the FBI and other intelligence agencies in the elections? Were you aware of that?
I'm not aware of the particular survey or poll or study or whatever it is.
In that same poll, 71% of Americans, which is certainly a bipartisan group, agreed that internal FBI changes post-2016 had not done enough to prevent further interference in elections, and that, quote, wide-ranging reform was still required. And again, you're not aware of those numbers?
No.
Does any of that shock you?
You know, I don't spend a lot of time as FBI director worrying about polls. What I do look at is whether people want to work with us, whether people want to work for us. And on both of those metrics, we're actually going up quite significantly. In fact, in your home state of Texas, we've got a 93% increase in the number of Texans applying to work for the FBI since I've been in this job. And in fact, it's the highest. Texas has more people applying to work for the FBI than any other state in the union.
Even if you do not watch polls, certainly you appreciate the fact that you want the trust of the American people. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
All right. Does it bother you that so many Americans do not trust the FBI presently?
Well, again, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about polls. I do care about what I hear
I'm
from
asking about
American
the
people
trust.
otherwise. But it bothers me anytime any American has lost trust in the FBI. Of course, that concerns me.
Earlier, you're talking to Representative Hageman, and you said where we can take action where possible to remove them from the chain of command, and then you ended your time, you got cut off because we had to get some votes. You were going to say something further on that. Do you have any plans to remove anybody from the chain of command or go through a process to determine who should be removed from the chain of command?
Well, I have already removed any number of people from at different stages of my tenure from the chain of command. I have also referred people to our disciplinary arm, which has resulted in some cases in termination.
Do you have any plans to do any more of that?
If somebody has violated a rule, absolutely.
When we talk about a good faith basis for trust to Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, does it bother you that these illegal FISA queries have continued even with efforts of the FBI to try to reduce them, that we now have somewhere between a couple 100,000 and at least 1 million of illegal FISA inquiries?
Well, there are two things going on there. One, I think your numbers of what are actually illegal are off. But second, and more importantly to me, all of the changes that we have put in place to address compliance failures that I consider unacceptable have pointed to the effectiveness of the reforms that we've put in place. So that I'm talking about.
What number of illegal FISA queries would you put on the table as those that you know of?
Well, here's what I can tell you. The most recent FISA court opinion found, I think it's a like 98% compliance rate. The most recent DOJ audit found a 99 or 98% compliance rate.
Is that acceptable to you? Is that 1% or 2%?
We strive for 100%. But all of those things, whether it's the FISC, the FISA court, whether it's ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, whether it's DOJ, whether it's our own Office of Internal Audit, which I created, by the way, all four of those things have shown that the reforms that we've been putting in place have already had dramatic positive impact. Am I satisfied with that? No.
Has anybody been fired or removed as a result of their inappropriate use of FISA?
Well, the last time somebody has had truly abusive behavior with respect to FISA, it goes back a ways, but those people have been gone from the organization.
Are you making a distinction between truly abusive and just abusive? What's the distinction there?
Well, the distinction I would draw is between intentional or reckless conduct versus somebody who makes a good faith mistake. To me, a good faith mistake is still a compliance violation, and still somebody needs to be counseled and trained and coached and taught to do it right. But that's different from somebody who intentionally or recklessly breaks the rules.
Director Wray, I'm going to go back where I started, and that is with trust. We trust you when we give the FBI tools. We trust that those tools would not be abused. I think in the last 6 years, certainly we've seen a number of abuses of the tools given, And I think as a result of that, you're going to see a curtailment of some of the tools that are provided to the FBI. That's not a choice that we're in a position that we want to make, but we have to make as a result of the abuses of the trust of the American people. Thank you for your time today.
Gentleman yields back. Director, I have just a couple extra questions, but in fairness to the minority, I'll recognize Mr. Johnson, so he'll go for a few questions. I'll have a few, and then we appreciate you being here for this length of time, and then we'll be able to adjourn the hearing. But the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you. Director Wray, you have acquitted yourself admirably today under severe and constant fire. And so your day is about to come to a close with your head still standing, your head still held high, and your soul, I'm sure, further empowered to continue doing the right thing on behalf of the American people through your service as director of the FBI, and I thank you for that. You were asked multiple times about the Missouri versus Biden injunction. This is a preliminary injunction issued on a holiday, July 4th, Independence Day. And it makes various allegations that thus far have been totally unproven, but relied upon as true here by members of this committee. What is your response to the allegations that the FBI has been engaged in censoring social media platforms or anyone else?
Well, while I respect the court's decision, I think there are a number of factual findings that we don't agree with. And certainly the FBI is not engaged, in my view, in censorship or content suppression.
My Republican colleagues also seem to think that the FBI is being weaponized against the American people. What is your response to that allegation? And that will be my final question for today to you.
The FBI that I see every day, and again, when I see the FBI, nobody gets to see it the way I do. I've been to all 56 of our field offices at least twice. I've spoken with partners, law enforcement partners in all 50 states multiple times, with federal judges all over the country, with business leaders, community leaders, prosecutors, victims, more importantly, and their families. The FBI that I see every day is working their tails off to protect the American people from a really staggering array of threats. They are an inspiring, incredibly dedicated group of people. And the FBI I see is best captured by the Chicago agent who had his arm shot up by an AR-15 chasing a fugitive and retrained himself to shoot left-handed and then requalified for SWAT left-handed. By the Atlanta agent who unexpectedly came across a fugitive, a gang fugitive, chased the guy into a car, got caught in the car door. The guy drove off with the Atlanta agent stuck in the door. The guy headed out onto the freeway. Poor agent, broke his pelvis and Lord knows how many other things, and yet he still managed to apprehend the subject. The FBI that I see is captured by the Portland agent who, out for a run, comes across a mentally ill woman down in the train tracks and climbs down in the train tracks to try to wrestle her out of the way of the oncoming train while she's trying to bite him and everything else, and gets her to safety. Or the bomb tech who comes across a booby trap, blows up on him, and the next business day he's back at work. That's the FBI that I see. I could give you countless examples. That is the real FBI.
Well, I thank you again for your service, and I appreciate the fact that you have allowed your somewhat loquaciousness to emerge during this hearing with that final response. Thank you.
I think the gentleman yields back. Director, we appreciate those. The whole country does. In fact, I said this in an interview this morning, a TV interview this morning. Two of those agents who served for years in the FBI did great work, now work for the committee on the Republican staff. And we appreciate the work they did then, the work they're doing now. But they share the same concerns raised by members of the committee. That's why they came to work for us. So I just got a couple other questions. Any of the FBI personnel who did improper queries of the 702 database, have any of those individuals lost their clearance?
Well, we had, depends on how far back you want to go in time. We've had individuals, if you go back to say like 2018, I think was the last I remember, where you had somebody who engaged in intentional conduct and the person, for example, is gone. I think there were security clearances revoked for people back in that time period, but I don't know that we've had somebody who's engaged in, intentional or reckless conduct more recently than that. We have, as you may know, Mr. Chairman, and this actually didn't come up today, but it's important for people to know. We recently put in place a whole new set of accountability policies specifically focused on 702 that go through cascading consequences.
Yep.
And so that's an important
It's been reported that donors of a congressional member of Congress were illegally searched. Has that individual lost their clearance?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the specific example. So.
Well, it's been widely reported that the donor base for a member of Congress has been searched, and I just wonder if the person responsible for that has had any consequences, like a loss of security clearance.
I don't know the answer.
Okay. Is the FBI assisting the Secret Service in the investigation as to how cocaine wound up at the White House?
Yes, I want to be a little bit careful about what I can say here because the Secret Service is leading the investigation. But as is standard in an investigation where white powder is found, the FBI's lab personnel did an evaluation to determine whether or not there was a sort of biological.
Is that the only assistance?
That's the only assistance we've done so far. We have offered the full range of our assistance to the Secret Service. If they want to use us for that purpose. But beyond that, I would refer you to the Secret Service.
Is that offer's been denied? Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that. We've offered it to the Secret Service, but beyond that, I would refer to them.
In October of 2020, when Facebook asked the FBI, is the Biden laptop story Russian disinformation? The FBI's answer was no comment. Who gave that answer?
And before you answer, sir, if I might just interject the fact that we agreed that I would have 2 questions and you would have 2 questions.
I think I said a couple questions.
Yeah, and you've asked a couple.
In fact, I know I said a couple questions, but I gave you 5 minutes,
But I'll.
Do you want another question?
No, I want us to conclude this hearing, and I
And
respect
we will be
your
done in
prerogative
2
as
minutes
the
and
chair.
10 seconds. Thank you. We appreciate that, and we obviously appreciate the director being here. In October 2020, when Facebook asked the FBI, is the Biden laptop story Russian disinformation? The FBI's response was no comment. Do you know who gave that response?
I do not.
The court knew, and the court said it was Laura Demlow. Do you know who Laura Demlow is?
I do know who Laura Demlow is.
What does she do?
Laura Demlow is an agent in our counterintelligence division, and she currently works with the Foreign Influence Task Force.
Doesn't she head the Foreign Influence Task Force?
I think she leads it, yeah.
She leads the Foreign Influence Task Force. Did you tell her to give that comment?
Did I what now?
Did you instruct anyone, when Facebook asked, did you instruct them to give the no comment?
I don't remember giving any instruction along those lines, although I should say I'm not sure whether Laura Demlow was in that role at the time frame that you described, but
Again, the court in Louisiana said she was, and said when Facebook asked her specifically, she said no comment. And this is the Foreign Influence Task Force leader, Foreign Influence Task Force that you created as director of the FBI, correct? Oh, that's correct. You created the Foreign Influence Task Force.
I did create the Foreign Influence Task Force.
Yeah, you put that together, and she heads it up. Okay. How did you become aware of the Catholic memo? The one in Richmond that we talked about a couple times today.
As I recall, in one of my regular morning meetings, I learned that there was this product, and that was the same day that I ordered that it be removed.
Was that before or after it was already in the press?
That I can't tell you. My guess is it was probably around the same time, but I don't know.
Did you learn about it? Did the people who brought it up to you, did they learn about it from the press, or was it some internal communication?
I can't speak to how they learned about it. I just know that I was told about it by them, and we had a conversation about immediately taking steps that we then did.
We appreciate that. Okay, Director, we appreciate your time today. I know it's been a long day. We already had the unanimous consent from Mr. Gates, so the committee is adjourned.
Well, boys and girls, that was a fun time, wasn't it? Thank you all so much for stopping by the channel. Let me hang out and kick it over here in the live chat for a minute and say what up to everybody. Thank you guys for all sticking with us. Appreciate it. Eric, thank you guys. Everybody, I made you all mods, so I appreciate y'all for holding it down on the channel. Thank you guys. Hopefully you guys have a great day. I don't know where this is going to go. I'm sure I'll be clipping up a bunch of clips from this weekend. And if there's any timestamps that you guys want, let me share this link with you guys. And then maybe if there's any timestamps that you want Kyle to comment on, or you want to see some more information about what Kyle thinks about these things, let me give you one of these links right here to this video. So when this thing actually publishes and is live on there, if you guys just want to send me over on Twitter some DMs with like, oh, here's timestamp, 55 minutes and 30 seconds to 56 minutes and 30 seconds. If you guys send me those timestamps on, I'll see if I can get with Kyle and have Kyle give us a little breakdown on them. I know he's going to want to go over these when he gets back into town, so maybe I can get him to do a special stream. If not, we'll probably do it Monday or sometime next week. So thank you all so much, everybody over here on YouTube and Rumble. I appreciate you guys. Here's the link to the YouTube video. DJen, what up? James, good to see you, man. Hopefully you guys all have a great day. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.